Chapter 1. Night in the Cemetery of the City of Sands. The city of Al-Bahar lay upon the coast like a jewel scattered across golden sand, its white walls catching the last rays of the setting sun and turning them to amber and rose. It was a city of sailors and merchants, of spice traders and silk weavers, of scholars who copied ancient texts by candlelight, and fishermen who sang old songs to calm the evening sea. But Nura saw none of this beauty on the evening her father was buried. She was 25 years old, and now she was alone in the world. Her mother had died when she was a child, a fever that came with the rains and took her in 3 days. Her father, Ibrahim the bookbinder, had raised her in the small house above his shop, teaching her to read and write in 3 languages, to repair torn pages and mix inks from minerals and plants, to love the weight of a book in her hands and the smell of old paper and leather. He had been her whole world, and now he was gone. The funeral had been that afternoon, a simple affair. Her father had not been a wealthy man, but he had been respected. A dozen of his customers had come, merchants whose ledgers he had bound, travelers whose maps he had repaired, a few old scholars who remembered Ibrahim from his youth. They had said the prayers. They had lowered him into the ground in the old cemetery outside the city walls, where generations of Al-Bahar's dead rested beneath stones that had been worn smooth by wind and sand. Now it was evening, and Nura should have been home, but she could not bear the thought of returning to that empty house where her father's tools still lay on the workbench, where his reading glasses still sat beside his favorite chair, where the silence would be so complete it would feel like drowning. So instead, she walked back to the cemetery. The old walls of Al-Bahar rose behind her as she made her way along the dusty path. The cemetery was quiet, dotted with weathered headstones and small tombs. A few date palms grew here and there, their fronds rustling in the evening breeze that came off the sea. The sun had set and the sky was turning from gold to violet to deep blue. Nura knelt beside the fresh grave, still bare of the stone that would be carved with her father's name. Someone had already placed a small bunch of desert flowers there. She didn't know who. She touched the dry earth gently. "I don't know what to do now, Father," she whispered. "You taught me so many things, but you never taught me how to be alone." The words hung in the air, unanswered. She had not expected an answer, but the silence still hurt. That was when she heard it, a small, plaintive sound, a meow. Nura looked up. In the dimming light, she could just make out a small shape sitting on top of a nearby grave, a tomb marked with a simple stone carved with a ship, the traditional marker of a sailor's resting place. It was a cat. As her eyes adjusted, she could see it more clearly, a slender creature with gray-brown fur, sitting very still, very upright, staring at the grave beneath it with an intensity that seemed almost human. As she watched, it meowed again, not the demanding cry of a hungry stray, but a sound of such pure loneliness that it made her chest ache. "Hello," Nura said softly. The cat's ears swiveled toward her, but it didn't look away from the grave. Slowly, careful not to startle it, Nura stood and walked over. The stone was old, the carving of the ship barely visible now. There was no name, either it had worn away or had never been carved, but the grave was clearly old, decades at least. Yet the cat sat there as if keeping vigil, as if the grave were fresh. "What are you doing here, little one?" Nura asked. "That's Zayed's cat," a voice said behind her. Nura turned. The cemetery keeper was standing a short distance away, an old man named Hassan, bent with age, leaning on his walking stick. She had seen him at the funeral but had not spoken to him. "Zayed?" she asked. Hassan nodded, shuffling closer. "Zayed the sailor, died 2 weeks ago. That tomb there," he pointed to the grave the cat was sitting on. "That's his. Worked the merchant ships for 40 years, that man. Never married. Lived alone in a little room by the docks with just that cat for company." He paused, looking at the cat with something like sadness. "When Zayed died, nobody knew what to do with the creature. It ran off before anyone could catch it. Then, 3 days ago, I found it here, sitting on Zayed's grave, just like that. It comes every evening, sits there until full dark, then disappears. Won't let anyone near it. Won't eat food I've left out. Just waits." Nura looked back at the cat. In the gathering darkness, its eyes caught the last light and gleamed like amber. "It's morning," she said softly. "Aye," Hassan agreed. "Animals know grief, same as us. Maybe more than us sometimes. They don't have words to make sense of it, so they just feel it." He tapped his stick against the ground and turned to go. "I'm locking the cemetery gates soon, miss. You should head home before full dark. The roads aren't safe for a young woman alone at night." "I will. Thank you, Hassan." The old man nodded and shuffled away, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path. Nura stood for a long moment, looking at the cat. It had finally turned its head to look at her. In the deepening twilight, she couldn't make out much detail, just the outline of its small body, the glimmer of its eyes, the way it sat so perfectly still. 2 orphans, she thought, both of us alone now, both of us sitting in a cemetery, not wanting to go home to empty rooms. She felt something stir in her chest, recognition perhaps, or kinship. Slowly she knelt down a few feet from the grave. "I understand," she said quietly. "I just lost someone too. It hurts, doesn't it? Like there's a hole in the world where they used to be." The cat tilted its head slightly, watching her. "You can't stay here," Nura continued. "Hassan will lock the gates, and even if you could stay, what then? You'll starve. Zayed wouldn't want that, would he? He took care of you. That means he would want you to be taken care of." She held out her hand, palm up, not reaching toward the cat but simply offering. "Come with me," she said. "My house is small, but there's room. There are books, so many books, and it's quiet, and I think we could help each other. I think we're the same, you and I. We're both lost." For a long moment, nothing happened. The cat just stared at her with those amber eyes. Then, slowly, it stood up. It stretched, first its front legs, then its back legs, the way cats do. And then, to Nura's surprise, it hopped down from the grave and walked toward her. It stopped just out of reach and sat down again, looking at her expectantly. Nura felt tears prick at her eyes, the first tears she had shed since her father's death. Not tears of grief this time, but of something else. Relief, perhaps, or the simple comfort of not being completely alone. "All right," she said, her voice thick. "Let's go home." She stood, and the cat stood too. And when she began walking toward the cemetery gates, the cat followed, keeping pace beside her like a shadow, its paws making no sound on the darkening path. Chapter 2. The House Above the Bazaar and the First Sign. The house was exactly as Nura had left it that morning, quiet, dim, filled with the comfortable clutter of a bookbinder's life. It was a small place, really more of an apartment, built above her father's shop in the artisan quarter of Al-Bahar. You reached it by climbing a narrow exterior staircase that clung to the building's side. The shop itself was closed now, its shutters pulled down and locked. Nura would have to decide soon what to do with it. Keep it running, sell it, rent it out. But that was a problem for another day. Upstairs, the living space consisted of 3 small rooms, a main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once, a bedroom that Nura had used since childhood, and what had been her father's bedroom, which now felt like a shrine she was not yet ready to enter. But the main room was comfortable. One wall was entirely covered in shelves crammed with books, some her father's, some belonging to customers and waiting to be repaired, some ancient volumes that Ibrahim had collected over the years and never been willing to sell. A low table sat in the center, surrounded by cushions. A small kitchen area occupied one corner, with a clay stove and shelves of mismatched pottery. The window looked out over the street below, where even now, well after dark, she could hear the sounds of the city, distant conversations, a donkey braying, someone playing a reed flute. Nura lit an oil lamp and warm light filled the room. The cat had followed her up the stairs without hesitation. Now it stood in the middle of the room, looking around with what seemed like careful assessment. "It's not much," Nura said, "but it's home." She went to the kitchen area and found a small bowl, which she filled with water from the clay jar by the wall. She set it on the floor. "I don't have any meat," she said apologetically. "I haven't been to the market, but I have some bread and cheese. Will that do?" She tore off a piece of bread and crumbled some cheese onto a plate, setting it beside the water bowl. The cat approached cautiously, sniffed at the food, and then, apparently finding it acceptable, began to eat with delicate precision. Nura watched for a moment, then realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast herself. She prepared a similar meal for herself and sat at the low table, picking at the food without much appetite. "You'll need a name," she said after a while. The cat had finished eating and was now washing its face with one paw, the way cats do. "I can't just keep calling you cat," Nura continued. "That's not respectful. And Hassan said your name was Zayed's cat, but that's his name, not yours." She thought for a moment, studying the cat in the lamplight. It was a handsome creature, actually, slender and graceful, with alert eyes and a way of moving that seemed almost unnaturally fluid. "Zarif," she said finally. "That means elegant or graceful. It suits you. What do you think?" The cat, Zarif, looked at her for a moment, then, apparently satisfied, went back to washing. Nura found herself smiling slightly. It was a small thing, this moment of choosing a name, but it felt important somehow. It felt like claiming something, like saying, "You belong here now. You belong to me, and I belong to you, and we'll face this loneliness together." That night, Nura lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, expecting to lie awake for hours as she had every night since her father had fallen ill. But to her surprise, she heard a soft thump, and then felt a weight settle onto the blanket beside her. Zarif, curling up near her feet, a warm presence in the darkness, and for the first time in weeks, Nura slept. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. Nura had to live, and living required money. Fortunately, her father had taught her his trade. She might not have his decades of experience, but she could bind books, repair torn pages, mix inks, and copy manuscripts in a clear, elegant hand. And Al-Bahar was a city of trade, which meant there was always work for someone who could read and write. She reopened the shop downstairs, hanging the sign her father had painted years ago. Ibrahim's books, repairs, binding, copying. At first, the customers who came were the same ones who had known her father. Merchants who needed ledgers bound, scholars who needed ancient texts repaired, a few wealthy families who wanted beautiful copies of poetry made for their private libraries. They came partly out of habit, partly out of respect for Ibrahim's memory, and partly because word spread quickly that his daughter had his skill with books, if not yet his speed. The work was slow at first, but steady, and Nura found that she liked it. like the smell of leather and glue, the feel of good paper under her fingertips, the satisfaction of taking something broken and making it whole again. And through it all, Zarif was there. The cat seemed to have decided that his place was in the shop. He would sleep on the windowsill during the day, the sun warming his fur, occasionally opening one eye to watch Nura work. Sometimes customers would comment on him, and Nura would smile and say, "He's my assistant." And it almost seemed true. There was something comforting about his presence, something that made the shop feel less empty. At night they would go upstairs together, and Nura would prepare simple meals for both of them. She had gone to the market and bought fish scraps from the fishmonger, which Zarif accepted with much more enthusiasm than bread and cheese. They would eat together in the lamplight, and then Nura would sit at the table and read, sometimes for work, sometimes for pleasure, while Zarif groomed himself or dozed nearby. It was a quiet life, a lonely life in some ways, but it was bearable. And then, 3 weeks after Nura had brought Zarif home, something strange happened. It was late evening. Nura was working on a commission. A wealthy merchant had asked her to copy a collection of poems, and she was halfway through the work. The manuscript lay open on her table, and she was carefully forming each letter in her best calligraphy, a small inkpot beside her, the lamplight steady and warm. Zarif was, as usual, on the windowsill, but then Nura felt it, a change in the air, a strange electricity, like the feeling before a thunderstorm. The lamp flame flickered, though there was no wind. She looked up. The sky outside the window had been clear when she'd last looked, but now she could see clouds gathering, dark clouds moving with unnatural speed, and there was a wind rising, a hot wind that smelled of dust and something else, something she couldn't name, something ancient. The shutters began to rattle. "That's strange," Nura murmured, standing and going to the window. The weather was fine an hour ago. She reached for the shutter to close it, and that's when she saw Zarif. The cat was standing now, no longer relaxed but rigid, his fur standing slightly on end, and his eyes were glowing, not reflecting the lamplight but actually glowing from within, a bright amber color like heated honey, like molten gold. "Zarif?" Nura said, her voice uncertain, and as she watched, frozen in place, she saw something else, patterns appearing in Zarif's fur, swirls and lines and symbols, visible for just a moment, like light shining through him from inside. They looked almost like writing, like the ancient script she sometimes saw in the oldest manuscripts, the ones from the days of great magicians and jinn. Then, as quickly as it had come, the wind died, the clouds scattered, the lamp flames steadied, and Zarif was just a cat again, just a small gray-brown cat, sitting on the windowsill, looking at her with ordinary green eyes. Nura stood there, her heart pounding, her hand still raised toward the shutter. Had she imagined it? She must have imagined it. She'd been working too long, straining her eyes in the lamplight. She was tired, grieving. Her mind was playing tricks, but even as she told herself this, she knew it wasn't true. She had seen what she had seen. Slowly, carefully, she approached Zarif. The cat watched her come, calm now, his tail wrapped neatly around his paws. "What are you?" she whispered. Zarif tilted his head, and for just a moment, Nura could have sworn she saw something in those eyes, not just animal intelligence, but something deeper, something aware. Then he meowed, a perfectly ordinary meow, and jumped down from the windowsill, padding across the room to the cushion where he usually slept. Nura stood by the window for a long time, her thoughts churning. She should be frightened, she thought. She should throw the creature out, or take it to an imam, or something. But she wasn't frightened. She was curious, and beneath the curiosity she felt something else. A strange excitement, like standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. She went to her father's shelves and pulled down one of his oldest books, a volume of folk tales and legends collected from travelers. She had read it as a child and been half frightened, half fascinated by the stories of jinn and enchanted objects, of curses and blessings, of animals that were more than they seemed. She opened it now and began to read by lamplight, while across the room Zarif slept peacefully, just an ordinary cat having ordinary cat dreams, or so it appeared. But Nura knew better now. The seed of curiosity had been planted, and like all seeds given time, it would grow. Bazaar, Chapter 3. The Black Cat and the Pirates from the Mist. 2 weeks passed, and nothing unusual happened. Nura began to wonder if she had imagined the entire incident. The glowing eyes, the strange symbols in Zarif's fur. Perhaps it had been a trick of the light after all, her tired mind conjuring phantoms. Life continued its quiet rhythm. She worked in the shop during the day, copying manuscripts and repairing books. In the evenings, she and Zarif ate together, and she read while he dozed. At night, he slept at the foot of her bed, a warm weight against her feet. He was just a cat, an ordinary cat, or so she almost believed. Then the merchant came. His name was Abdullah Al-Fassi, and he was from the far western lands, Morocco, he said, though he traded across the entire Mediterranean. He was a portly man with an elaborate turban and rings on every finger, and he came into Nura's shop on a hot afternoon, fanning himself with a decorated fan. "I am told," he said in a booming voice, "that Ibrahim the bookbinder is the finest craftsman in Al-Bahar. I have a commission that requires the very best." "Ibrahim was my father," Nura said quietly, rising from her work. "He passed away some weeks ago. I am Nura. I have inherited his shop and his skills." Abdullah looked her up and down skeptically. A woman? Can a woman truly do such work? Nura had been asked this question before. She simply gestured to the examples of her work displayed on a shelf. Beautifully bound volumes, careful repairs, elegant calligraphy. Abdullah examined them, his expression changing from skepticism to grudging approval. "Well," he said at last, "perhaps you will do. I am leaving on a trading voyage in 3 days, sailing north to Constantinople and beyond. I have need of someone who can read and write, someone who can help me decipher charts and translate letters from merchants who write in different tongues. I had a secretary, but the fool went and caught a fever. I will pay well. 5 gold dinars for the voyage, which should take 2 months. 5 gold dinars. That was more than Nura usually made in half a year. But a voyage, leaving Al-Bahar? She had never been on a ship in her life. "I don't know," she began. 6 dinars, Abdullah said immediately. "And you'll see wonders, girl. The great city of Constantinople, the markets of Venice, perhaps even the strange lands of the north where the sun barely sets in summer. Ibrahim's daughter should see the world, not hide in a dusty shop." Nura hesitated. But the truth was, 6 gold dinars would secure her future, let her repair the shop, buy better materials, perhaps even hire an assistant. And wasn't she curious about the world beyond Al-Bahar? Her father had always talked about the places he'd read about in books, but he'd never traveled himself. "I have a cat," she said. "He would have to come with me." Abdullah shrugged. "Ships always have cats. They keep the rats in check. Bring him." And so, 3 days later, Nura found herself standing on the docks of Al-Bahar, a small bundle of belongings over her shoulder and Zarif in a woven basket at her feet, looking up at the massive shape of Abdullah's merchant ship, It was called the Zephyr's Blessing, and it was beautiful in the way that working ships are beautiful, not decorated or ornate, but strong and purposeful, its sails furled, its deck bustling with sailors making final preparations for departure. "Come aboard!" Abdullah called from the deck. "And keep that cat away from my cargo!" Nura picked up the basket and climbed the gangplank, feeling the strange give and sway of the wood beneath her feet, smelling salt and tar and fish and all the peculiar smells of the sea. This is madness, part of her thought. You should go home. But another part, a part that had been sleeping for a long time, perhaps since her father had gotten sick, whispered, "This is adventure. This is living." She didn't go home. The ship left port with the morning tide. The first week at sea was both wonderful and terrible. Wonderful because the world was so much bigger than Nura had ever imagined. The way the water stretched to the horizon in every direction. The way the sky seemed vast enough to swallow everything. The way the stars at night were so bright and so many that they looked like spilled diamonds. Terrible, because Nura spent the first 3 days violently seasick, barely able to keep down water, let alone food. She lay in the tiny cabin Abdullah had given her, barely more than a closet really, and wished she was dead. Zarif, infuriatingly, seemed completely unaffected. He prowled the ship with confidence, making friends with the sailors, who admired his prowess in catching the rats that inevitably infested any vessel. But by the 4th day, Nura's stomach had adjusted to the constant motion. She emerged on deck, pale and shaky, but determined, and began to do the work Abdullah had hired her for. It turned out she was good at it. She could read the charts the navigator used, could translate letters from Italian and Greek merchants, could keep neat records of cargo and transactions in a way that pleased Abdullah greatly. Ibrahim would be proud, the merchant told her one evening, and Nura felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in weeks. The sea was mostly kind. They sailed northward along the coast, stopping at small ports to trade. Nura saw cities she'd only read about, ancient Tripoli, bustling Alexandria, the gleaming walls of Rhodes, and everywhere they went, Zarif came with her, riding on her shoulder or trotting beside her through foreign markets, drawing smiles from strangers. "Your cat is unusual," one old woman in a Cypriot market told her. "He has old eyes." Nura wasn't sure what that meant, but she thanked the woman anyway. They were 2 weeks out from Al-Bahar, sailing through empty waters between Cyprus and the Turkish coast when the pirates came. It was late afternoon. The sea was calm, almost glassy, and a strange mist had rolled in, not a natural fog, but something thicker, yellower, that smelled of smoke and something rotten. "I don't like this," the captain, a grizzled sailor named Rashid, muttered, standing at the wheel. "Mist like this. It's not natural." Abdullah waved a dismissive hand. "Superstitious nonsense, it's just weather." But Nura, standing on the deck with Zarif beside her, felt a creeping unease, and then, cutting through the mist, came the sound of drums, battle drums. "Pirates!" someone shouted. And out of the fog, like demons emerging from hell, came 2 ships, low, fast vessels with black sails, their decks crowded with armed men. Chaos erupted on the Zephyr's Blessing. The sailors scrambled to their positions, grabbing weapons, curved swords, bows, whatever they had. Captain Rashid shouted orders, trying to turn the ship to run, but the pirate vessels were faster, closing in from both sides. "Get below," Abdullah shouted at Nura. "Hide yourself!" But Nura stood frozen, watching the pirate ships approach. And then she felt it. That same electric feeling from weeks ago, that sense of the air itself changing. She looked down. Zarif was standing rigid, his fur beginning to stand on end. And as she watched, his color began to change. The gray-brown of his fur darkened, deepened, became darker than dark, became black, not the black of a black cat, but a black like midnight, like the space between stars, like the deepest part of the ocean where no light has ever reached. "Zarif," Nura whispered. The cat looked up at her, and his eyes were no longer green but gleaming gold. Then, before Nura could react, he leaped away from her and raced across the deck. "Wait!" Nura called, and ran after him. The pirates were boarding now, grappling hooks flying through the air, ropes being pulled tight. The first few raiders were swinging across the gap between ships, their weapons raised, their faces twisted in fierce grins. But Nura didn't see any of that. She was following Zarif, who was racing toward the stern of the ship, where fishing nets and spare rope were stored. He reached a pile of netting that had been damaged in a storm days ago and began pawing at it frantically, meowing. "What are you—" Nura began. And then she saw it. Beneath the torn nets was a coil of rope, thick and strong. But not just any rope. This was rope that had been treated with some kind of oil or resin, rope that would be difficult to cut, rope designed for securing sails in fierce storms. Without understanding why, Nura grabbed the rope. All around her the battle had been joined. She could hear the clash of steel, the shouts of men fighting. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw one of Abdullah's sailors fall, clutching a wound in his shoulder. But she also saw something else. The pirates had grappling hooks securing their ship to the Zephyr's blessing. If those hooks could be dislodged, if the connection could be broken, moving on pure instinct, Nura ran to the nearest grappling hook. It was embedded in the wooden rail of the ship, its rope stretched tight. Using the rope she'd found, the special strong rope that Zarif had led her to, she fashioned a quick loop, slipped it around the grappling hook, and pulled. "Captain Rashid," she screamed. "Help me!" The captain, fighting off a pirate with his sword, glanced over and saw what she was doing. Understanding flashed across his face. "Men!" he roared. "The grapples! Dislodge the grapples!" 3 sailors broke away from the fighting and rushed to help. Using Nura's rope and their combined strength, they managed to lever the first grappling hook free. It flew backward, smashing into the pirate ship's rail. Then the second hook, then the third. The pirate captain, seeing what was happening, screamed orders to his men. But it was too late. With the grapples removed, the 2 ships began to drift apart, the slight current pulling them away from each other. Some of the pirates tried to jump the widening gap. 2 made it. 3 fell into the water between the ships and disappeared beneath the dark surface. Captain Rashid, seeing his opportunity, spun the wheel. The Zephyr's blessing turned into the wind, its sails filling, and suddenly they were moving, pulling away from the pirate ships, which were now entangled in their own grappling ropes and unable to give chase immediately. The mist, that strange, unnatural mist, began to dissipate. Within minutes the pirate ships were lost behind them, and the crew of the Zephyr's blessing was cheering, hugging each other, checking wounds, counting their blessings. "We did it!" Abdullah shouted, his face red with excitement. "We beat them off." But Nura wasn't celebrating. She was standing by the rail, breathing hard, her hands shaking with adrenaline, looking down at Zarif. The cat sat at her feet, grooming his paw calmly, and his fur was gray-brown again, perfectly normal, as if nothing had happened. "You changed color," Nura whispered. "You turned black, and you knew about the rope. You led me to it." Zarif looked up at her with ordinary green eyes and meowed. Around them, the sailors were telling and retelling the story of the battle, each version growing more elaborate, but not one of them mentioned the cat. Not one of them had noticed the impossible change. Only Nura had seen. That night, after the excitement had died down and the ship sailed through peaceful waters under a sky full of stars, Nura sat in her tiny cabin with Zarif curled in her lap. "What are you?" she asked quietly. "You're not just a cat. Are you magic? Are you a jinn? A familiar? Something else?" Zarif purred and closed his eyes. But Nura had seen the truth now. Twice. Once could be explained away. Twice was a pattern. Her cat was impossible. And the mystery of him, the secret of what he truly was, had just become the most important question in her life. Chapter 4. The Crimson Rain of Stars. They reached the great city of Constantinople 3 weeks after the encounter with the pirates. It was the largest city Nura had ever seen, so vast that it made Al-Bahar look like a village by comparison. The massive walls, the great dome of the Hagia Sophia rising above the skyline, the crowded harbor filled with ships from every corner of the known world. The noise, the smells, the sheer overwhelming presence of so many people living in such a small space. Abdullah had business there that kept them in port for 5 days. He gave Nura leave to explore the city, and she walked through the markets with Zarif following at her heels, her mind spinning with sights and sounds and the babble of languages she couldn't understand. But always, in the back of her mind, was the question, "What are you?" She had tried to observe Zarif carefully since the pirate attack, watching for any sign of strangeness. But the cat had behaved normally, eating, sleeping, grooming, occasionally bringing her dead rats as presents, which she had to pretend to be grateful for, while hiding them before they started to smell. Whatever magic he possessed, it seemed dormant now. But Nura knew in her bones, that it would manifest again. She just didn't know when or how. They left Constantinople loaded with new trade goods, fine silks, delicate ceramics, dried figs and apricots, and turned west, heading for the island of Crete, and beyond that the Italian ports where Abdullah hoped to sell for a massive profit. The weather was good. The ship made excellent time. And then, on the 3rd night out from Constantinople, the stars began to fall. Nura had been sleeping when the shouting started. "Wake up! Everyone on deck!" She stumbled out of her cabin, half asleep, confused. All around her, sailors were rushing up from below decks, their faces tilted upward, their expressions caught between wonder and terror. She followed their gaze and gasped. The sky was on fire. No, not fire. Stars. Hundreds of them, thousands, streaking across the darkness in brilliant trails of white and orange and red, like someone had ripped open the heavens, and all the stars were falling out. Some burned so brightly that they cast shadows on the deck. Some were small, barely more than sparks. Others were huge, as large as Nura's fist from her perspective, trailing tails of flame. "Meteor shower," Captain Rashid said, his voice full of awe. "I've heard of them, but never seen one. By Allah, it's beautiful." It was beautiful. It was terrifying, because the meteors weren't just passing harmlessly overhead. Some of them were hitting the water, sending up great plumes of steam where they struck. One hit perhaps 100 yards from the ship, and even at that distance, Nura felt the spray of hot water on her face. "They're getting closer," someone said, their voice tight with fear. And they were. The sky had become a deadly rain of burning stone, and the ship was sailing directly beneath it. "Can we take shelter?" Abdullah demanded. "Go below?" "No shelter from something like that," Rashid said grimly. "If a big one hits us, it'll go right through the ship like a knife through cloth. We can only hope and pray." But hope and prayer, Nura thought, might not be enough. She looked around frantically, and then she saw him, Zarif, standing near the mast, his fur beginning to ripple and change. This time it wasn't black. This time it was red. Not the red of rust or brick or even fresh blood, but the red of molten metal. of lava, of the heart of a forge. His fur seemed to glow with an inner heat, and as Nura watched, the color deepened and brightened until Zarif looked like a small creature made of living fire. His eyes were gold again, burning like coals, and he was running. "Zarif!" Nura called, but the cat didn't stop. He raced across the deck, his glowing form leaving after-images in Nura's vision, and jumped up onto the rail of the ship. He stood there, silhouetted against the burning sky, and began to yowl. Not a normal cat's cry, but something deeper, stranger, almost like words in a language Nura didn't know. And the meteors, they began to change direction. Not all of them. The small ones, the distant ones, continued their random paths, but the large ones, the ones that had been falling directly toward the ship, began to curve away, as if pushed by an invisible hand. One massive meteor, large enough to have destroyed the ship entirely, fell directly toward them. Nura could see it growing larger and larger, could feel the heat of it, could hear the terrible whistling scream of its passage through the air. "Hold on!" Captain Rashid screamed, but Zarif stood on the rail, glowing like an ember, and yowled, and the meteor swerved. At the last possible moment, it curved to the left and hit the water 30 yards from the ship instead of amidships. The impact was still tremendous. A geyser of steam and hot water erupted, and the shock wave nearly capsized them. Nura was thrown to the deck, sliding across the wet boards, grabbing at a rope to keep from being washed overboard. When she looked up, gasping, the meteor shower was ending. The last few streaks of light faded from the sky, and the stars returned to their proper places, cold and distant and normal. The sea calmed, the ship rocked gently, settling, and on the rail, Zarif sat down, wrapped his tail around his paws, and began to groom himself with apparent unconcern. His fur was gray-brown again. The sailors were shouting, praising Allah, checking the ship for damage. One of the masts had been splintered by a falling fragment, and there were scorch marks on the deck, but otherwise they were intact, alive, miraculous. "Did you see that?" someone was saying. "Did you see how they missed us? Every single one." "Luck," Abdullah said, but his voice was shaking. "Incredible luck." "Luck," Nura thought. Is that what they're calling it? She stood up slowly, her legs weak, and walked over to where Zarif sat. The cat looked at her with calm, green eyes. Around them, no one was paying attention. They were all too busy celebrating their survival, too caught up in their own relief to notice one small cat sitting on the rail. No one had seen what Nura had seen. No one had watched Zarif change color, had heard that strange yowling, had seen the meteors bend away. No one except Nura. She reached out and gently picked up the cat, cradling him against her chest. His fur felt completely normal, soft, warm, ordinary. "You did that," she whispered. "You saved us." Zarif purred. Nura carried him back to her cabin. Her hands were still shaking, her mind reeling, black when there was danger from human enemies, red when there was danger from the sky. "What are you?" she thought again. "And how many colors can you change into? And most importantly, why are you with me?" She had no answers, but she was beginning to suspect that the universe had just given her a puzzle, a mystery wrapped in fur and whiskers, and she was meant to solve it. Or perhaps, she thought, as she lay down on her narrow bunk with Zarif curled beside her, the puzzle is meant to solve me. Either way, she knew one thing for certain: her life would never be ordinary again. Chapter 5. The Blue Flood and the City That Drowns. They returned to Al-Bahar 6 weeks after they had left, the Zephyr's blessing riding low in the water with a hold full of valuable goods. Abdullah was beside himself with joy at the success of the voyage, and he paid Nura not 6 gold dinars but 8, throwing in the extra as a bonus for what he called her exceptional service. "You have a gift for this work," he told her. "If you ever want to sail again, you let me know. I'll hire you in an instant." Nura thanked him, but privately she thought, once was enough, at least for now. She was glad to be home, glad to see the familiar white walls of Al-Bahar rising from the coast, to hear the call to prayer echoing from the minarets, to smell the familiar scents of the spice market and the sea. The house above the shop was dusty from weeks of being closed up, but it was still home. Nura opened all the windows to air it out, swept the floors, and reorganized her father's books, which had gotten disordered in her absence. Zarif explored every corner, reacquainting himself with the space, and finally settled on his favorite windowsill with a satisfied purr. For 3 days, life returned to normal. Customers came to the shop, delighted to have Nura back. She told them about her voyage, edited versions, leaving out pirates and meteor showers, and listened to the local news. And that's when she heard about the rains. "Worst storms in 20 years, old Hassan from the cemetery told her when he came in to have a prayer book repaired. "Started a week ago. The river's swollen to twice its normal size. If it doesn't stop soon." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Al-Bahar was built at the mouth of a river, the Wadi Nur, a seasonal waterway that was usually little more than a stream for most of the year, but could become a raging torrent during the rainy season. The city had flood channels and ancient drainage systems built by the Romans centuries ago. But if the river rose too high, those systems could be overwhelmed. And the poor quarters of the city, the districts where laborers and artisans and refugees from the countryside lived in cramped, improvised housing, those areas were built on the lowest ground, closest to the river. Those areas would flood first. Nura's district was on slightly higher ground, but not by much. That night, the rain began again. Not a gentle rain, but a deluge, water falling from the sky in sheets so thick that Nura could barely see across the street from her window. Thunder rolled constantly, and lightning turned the night into flickering day. She stood at the window, watching the street below turn into a river, and felt a creeping dread. Beside her, Zarif watched too, his ears flat against his head. The rain lasted 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, it stopped, but the damage was done. Nura woke to the sound of shouting in the streets below. She rushed to the window and saw water, not flowing, but standing, a pool that covered the entire street to a depth of perhaps 2 feet. People were wading through it, carrying belongings, children crying, voices raised in panic. "The river's breached," someone was shouting. "The lower quarter is flooding." Nura's heart clenched. She lived on the edge of the lower quarter. If the water was already this high here, she grabbed Zarif, who had been sleeping peacefully through the commotion, and rushed downstairs. The shop was a disaster. Water had seeped under the door and soaked the floor. Some of the books on the lower shelves were already damaged, their pages swollen and warped. But there was no time to worry about that now. Nura sloshed through the standing water and out into the street. The scene was chaos. Families evacuating, people trying to save their belongings, a few enterprising souls with boats and rafts offering to ferry people to higher ground for a price. "Where's it coming from?" Nura asked a man carrying a crying child. "The old canal system," he said grimly. "The Romans built it to drain excess water, but it hasn't been maintained in generations. The channels are clogged with trash and debris. The water has nowhere to go, so it's backing up into the streets. If someone doesn't clear those channels soon, half the city will be underwater by nightfall." He hurried past, and Nura stood there, her mind racing. She knew about the old canal system. Her father had shown her once, Years ago, when she was a child, there were access points throughout the city, stone-covered openings that led down into the ancient tunnels beneath the streets. If the channels could be opened, the water could drain away. But who would do it? The city authorities were overwhelmed, dealing with evacuations and trying to prevent looting. Nobody was thinking about infrastructure. Nura looked down at Zarif, still in her arms. "We have to help," she said. The cat looked at her with those green eyes, and for a moment, Nura could have sworn she saw understanding there. She waded through the flooded streets toward the old mosque at the center of her quarter. It was an ancient building, built on the site of a Roman temple, and her father had told her there was a canal access point in its courtyard. The mosque's courtyard was underwater, but the building itself was on a raised platform and still dry. Nura climbed the steps and set Zarif down, then turned to survey the courtyard. There, in the center, barely visible beneath the murky water, was a large stone slab with an iron ring set into it. That was the access point, but how could she move it? The slab was huge, designed to be immovable to prevent accidents or tampering. "I can't do this alone," she said aloud, despair creeping into her voice. And that's when it happened. Zarif, standing beside her, began to change. This time, the transformation was slower, more deliberate. His fur rippled and shifted, and the color began to change from gray-brown to a deep, beautiful blue. Not the blue of the sky, but the blue of deep water, of sapphires, of the ocean depths where light barely penetrates. His form seemed to shimmer, as if he was not entirely solid, and his eyes glowed with that now familiar golden light. Nura watched, transfixed, as her small cat became something more. Zarif jumped down from the dry steps into the flooded courtyard. He didn't swim. He walked on top of the water, his paws not sinking, as if the surface was solid beneath him. He walked to the center of the courtyard, to where the stone slab lay submerged, and sat down on top of it. And then he yowled, that same strange, almost human cry that Nura had heard during the meteor shower. The water began to move, not flowing away, but moving in a circle around the stone slab, faster and faster like a whirlpool. And as it moved, it began to push aside the debris that had accumulated on top of the slab. Branches, trash, mud, all the detritus that had washed into the courtyard. Within minutes the slab was clear, but it was still too heavy for Nura to move alone. Except, as she watched, the water itself seemed to get under the edges of the slab, lifting it, as impossible as that sounded. Lifting it and sliding it aside, revealing the dark opening of the canal shaft beneath. Immediately, water began to pour into the opening with a sound like a waterfall. "It's working," Nura breathed. But one opening wouldn't be enough. There were dozens of these access points throughout the lower quarter, all of them probably clogged, all of them needing to be opened. Zarif looked at her, and Nura understood. "Show me," she said. "Show me where they are." And the blue cat began to walk, still on top of the water as if it was solid ground, toward the next canal access point. Nura followed, wading through the receding water. It took hours. Zarif led her to 7 different access points scattered throughout the lower quarter. At each one, the same scene repeated, the water forming whirlpools, clearing debris, lifting the heavy stone slabs that Nura could never have moved on her own. And at each point people began to notice. "The water's draining," someone shouted. "The canals are open again." A crowd began to follow Nura and Zarif, though they kept a respectful distance. There was something about the blue cat walking on water that made people uncertain, reverent, almost afraid. "Is it a jinn?" someone whispered. "No, it's a blessing," an old woman said firmly. "Allah has sent help." Nura didn't correct them. She didn't know what to say. By evening, the water level in the lower quarter had dropped dramatically. It was still muddy and unpleasant, but the immediate danger had passed. Homes were no longer flooding. The crisis was averted. Exhausted, Nura made her way back to her shop, Zarif padding beside her. Gray-brown again now, just an ordinary cat, though people still stared and pointed as they passed. At her door, she found a small crowd waiting. Her neighbors, customers, strangers. "You saved us," a woman said, tears in her eyes. "You and your cat, you saved the quarter." "We're calling him the Luck Cat," another man said, "because wherever he goes, fortune follows." Nura didn't know what to say to that. She just nodded tiredly and went inside, closing the door gently but firmly. Upstairs, she collapsed onto a cushion, too exhausted to even think about eating. Zarif jumped into her lap and curled up, purring. "3 times now," Nura whispered, stroking his fur. "3 times you've changed, black for danger, red for fire from the sky, blue for water. What are you? Are you elemental? Are you a spirit? Are you—" She stopped, because Zarif was looking at her with those green eyes, and for the first time she saw something she hadn't seen before. Intelligence. Deep, profound human intelligence. He wasn't just a magical creature. He was someone trapped in a cat's body, someone who had been using his magic not for himself, but to protect her. "Oh," Nura breathed. "Oh, I understand now. You're not my cat at all, are you? You're something else. Someone else." Zarif purred and closed his eyes, but Nura's mind was racing now, fitting pieces together. Someone cursed, someone magical, someone who changed colors based on the type of danger they faced, as if the curse was connected to the elements themselves. Someone who had been a sailor's companion, who had mourned at a grave, who had been alone until she took him in. Someone who was waiting, but waiting for what? That answer, Nura suspected, would come soon, because magic always demanded a price and curses always had conditions. And whatever was happening to Zarif, whatever transformation he was undergoing, it wasn't finished yet. Sukter, Chapter 6, Whispers of the Golden Night. In the weeks following the flood, life in Al-Bahar slowly returned to normal, or what passed for normal in a city that had nearly drowned. The streets were cleaned, damaged homes were repaired. The canal system, now that it had been cleared, was working properly for the first time in generations, and the city authorities, embarrassed that they had let the infrastructure decay so badly, assigned workers to maintain it. And everywhere Nura went, people treated her with a new respect. The woman with the luck cat, they called her. Customers came to her shop not just for books, but to catch a glimpse of Zarif, as if proximity to the cat might bring them good fortune. Some left small gifts, a fish, a bowl of cream, once even a silver collar that Zarif refused to wear. Nura accepted the attention with as much grace as she could muster, but privately it made her uncomfortable. She wasn't a miracle worker. She was just a woman who had opened some drains. It was Zarif who had done the impossible, and Zarif who still hadn't explained himself. The cat had returned to his normal routine, sleeping on the windowsill, catching rats, purring when Nura scratched behind his ears. He looked like an ordinary cat. He behaved like an ordinary cat. But Nura knew better. She found herself watching him constantly, looking for signs, clues, any hint of the intelligence she had seen in his eyes after the flood. But if Zarif was aware of her scrutiny, he gave no sign. He simply existed as cats do in the eternal present moment. It was maddening. "Talk to me," Nura said one evening, sitting at her table with a cup of tea while Zarif groomed himself nearby. "I know you can understand me. I know you're more than you seem. Please, I want to help you, but I can't if you won't tell me what's happening." Zarif paused in his grooming, looked at her for a long moment with those inscrutable green eyes, then went back to washing his paw. Nura sighed and returned to her tea. But that night, something changed. It began with small things. A scorpion in the corner of the shop. Zarif killed it before Nura even saw it. And when she found the crushed body the next morning, she realized how close she had come to stepping on it barefoot. A pickpocket in the market who tried to cut her purse. Zarif hissed and scratched at the thief's hand, startling him into dropping his knife and fleeing. A small fire that started in a neighbor's kitchen when oil spilled onto a cooking fire. Zarif yowled so loudly that everyone in the building woke up and was able to escape before the flames spread. Each time, Nura noticed a flicker of color in Zarif's fur, a hint of black, a touch of red, but never enough to be certain, never the full transformation she had witnessed before. It was as if the magic was building, accumulating, preparing for something. And then came the night of the crescent moon. Nura had been working late, copying a manuscript for a wealthy merchant. The work was detailed, illuminated letters, careful calligraphy, and she had lost track of time. When she finally looked up from her work, she realized it was past midnight. The lamp was burning low. The house was quiet except for the usual night sounds, distant voices, a dog barking, the wind rustling through the date palms in the courtyard below. Zarif was on the windowsill, as usual, sitting very still, looking out at the night sky. Nura stood and stretched, her back aching from hours of hunching over the desk. She walked to the window to close the shutters before going to bed. That's when she saw what Zarif was looking at, the moon, a thin crescent, like a silver blade hanging in the darkness, and as she watched, she saw something happening to Zarif's fur. It was changing again, but this time it wasn't black or red or blue. This time it was gold. Not the yellow gold of brass or honey, but true gold, the gold of coins and crowns, the gold that alchemists spent their lives trying to create, the gold that symbolized the divine and the eternal. His fur began to glow with a soft, warm light that cast gentle shadows across the room. The transformation spread slowly, starting at his paws and creeping upward, legs, body, tail, neck, head, until every inch of him was gleaming, luminous, impossibly beautiful. Nura stood frozen, her hand on the window shutter, unable to move, unable to breathe. The golden cat turned to look at her. His eyes were no longer green. They were molten gold, burning with an inner fire, and they looked at her with such intelligence, such awareness, such profound sadness that Nura felt her heart clench. "Zarif," she whispered. The cat opened his mouth and spoke. "Nura," he said in a voice that was male, young, gentle, and achingly human. "Thank you for waiting. Thank you for being patient with me." Nura's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, her back against the wall, staring at the golden cat who had just spoken her name in perfect Arabic. "This is madness," part of her mind screamed. "Cats don't talk. This is impossible." But another part, the part that had seen black cats and red cats and blue cats, that had watched meteors bend away and water lift stone slabs, that part simply said, finally, "You can talk," Nura heard herself say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Only when I'm like this," the cat, no, not the cat, not any more, said. He jumped down from the windowsill with fluid grace and sat a few feet away from her, his golden form casting light across the room. "Only when the magic has built up enough, when the moon is right, when the conditions align, and even then, not for long, an hour perhaps, maybe 2. "What are you?" Nura asked. "Not what," the golden cat said softly. "Who?" His name, he told her, was Farid. "I was human once," he said, his tail wrapped around his paws, his golden eyes reflecting the lamplight. 23 years old, the son of a sailor, not a wealthy man, not a powerful man, just a sailor who worked the merchant ships and told his son stories of all the places he'd been. Nura listened, still sitting on the floor, her mind struggling to accept what was happening. I loved stories, Farid continued. From the time I was a child, I loved them. My father's tales of distant ports, my mother's folk stories, the legends the old men told in the coffee houses. I collected them the way some men collect coins or jewels, and I became good at telling them. People said I had a gift, that when I spoke, you could see the places I described, feel the emotions of the characters, lose yourself in the tale. He paused, and something flickered across his feline features. Pain, perhaps, or regret. When I was 20, my father died at sea, a storm. I was alone with no trade except storytelling, and storytelling doesn't feed you unless you're very good or very lucky. So I traveled, moving from city to city, telling tales in market squares and coffee houses and caravanserais, living on whatever coins people threw into my cup. That sounds like a hard life, Nura said quietly. It was, but it was also wonderful. I saw so much, met so many people, heard so many stories. I was poor, but I was free, and I was good at what I did, good enough that I began to develop a reputation. Farid the storyteller, they called me, the one with the golden tongue. The golden cat, Farid, stood and began to pace, his movements restless. 3 years ago, I was in a city far to the east, beyond the great desert, in the lands where silk comes from. I was telling stories in a caravanserai, and there was a woman in the audience, beautiful, mysterious, dressed in fine clothes. She watched me all night, never taking her eyes off me. After my last tale, she approached me. "The witch," Nura said. Farid looked at her sharply. "You guessed? I saw you change colors, I saw you do impossible things. And I know the old stories. Cursed princes, enchanted animals. It's always a witch, isn't it? Or a djinn. Despite everything." Farid made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You're right. She was a witch, or a sorceress, or an enchantress. The distinction doesn't really matter. What matters is that she had power. Real power. The kind that most people think exists only in children's tales." He sat down again, and his voice grew softer. "She said she loved my stories. She said she wanted to hear them forever. She invited me to her home, a beautiful house on the outskirts of the city. I went, flattered by her attention, thinking perhaps she would become a patron, someone who would support my art. But she wanted more than stories," Nura said. "She wanted me," Farid confirmed. "Not my stories, me. She said she had been alone for 100 years, wandering the world, watching mortals live and die while she remained unchanged. She said I was special, that my gift with words was actually a tiny spark of magic, that I could be trained to become a true sorcerer if I stayed with her. And you refused." "I refused. I didn't want to be a sorcerer. I didn't want to live forever. I just wanted to travel and tell stories and be free. I tried to leave her house, and she—" He trailed off, and Nura could see pain in those golden eyes. "She cursed you," Nura finished. "Yes. She said if I wouldn't stay with her willingly, she would make me stay. She transformed me into a cat, not an ordinary cat, but a magical one, bound to a mortal master. She said I would remain a cat until I had passed through the 4 great trials, until I had saved a worthy soul from each of the 4 great dangers: earth, fire, water, and air. Only then would I earn the right to speak again. Only then could I seek her out and ask to be changed back." "But why a cat?" Nura asked. "Why not just trap you, or kill you?" "Because she was cruel," Farid said simply. "She wanted me to suffer. Cats are beloved," she said. "Cats are cared for. I would be fed and sheltered, but I would be voiceless, unable to tell my stories, unable to communicate, unable to be truly human. It was torture disguised as kindness. Nura felt a surge of anger at this unknown witch, this woman who had stolen a young man's life out of spite. "How long have you been like this?" she asked. 3 years. 3 long years. I was bonded to a sailor, Zayed, the man Hassan told you about. He was kind to me, treated me well, but he never knew what I really was. When he died, I mourned him truly. He had been my companion, even if he never knew I was human inside. And then you came." Farid moved closer, until he was sitting right in front of Nura. "You saw me at Zayed's grave, and you understood loneliness. You took me in, not because you wanted a pet, but because you recognized a kindred soul. And then the trials began." "The pirates," Nura said, understanding dawning. "That was the trial of Earth? No? Of human danger?" "The trials are connected to the elements, but they're more complex than just earth, fire, water, air," Farid explained. "They're about proving myself worthy, proving that I can use my curse's power not for myself, but to protect others. Black for danger from human evil, the pirates. Red for danger from the heavens, the meteors. Blue for danger from water, the flood. Each time I saved you, each time I used the curse's power for good instead of trying to fight against it, the magic grew stronger. And now," he gestured to his golden form, "now I can speak. The 4th trial hasn't come yet, the trial of air, of wind, of breath, but the magic has accumulated enough that I can take this form when the moon is right, and I can tell you the truth." Nura sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything. "What happens after the 4th trial?" she finally asked. "The curse said that after all 4 trials were complete, I would have the right to seek out the witch and ask to be changed back. But I would have to find her first, and she's not in that eastern city anymore. She's a wanderer, always moving. I don't know where she is." "Then we'll find her," Nura said firmly. Farid's golden eyes widened. "We? Do you think I would hear this story and just let you stay a cat?" Nura stood up, her earlier shock replaced by determination. "You saved me 3 times. You protected me from pirates and meteors and floods. You've been my companion, my friend. Of course I'm going to help you. Nura, you don't understand what you're offering. The witch could be anywhere. Finding her could take years. It could be dangerous. And even if we find her, there's no guarantee she'll lift the curse. She might demand a price you can't pay. She might—" "I don't care," Nura interrupted. "You're not just a cat to me, Farid. You're not just some cursed stranger. You're my friend. Maybe the best friend I've ever had. And friends help each other." She knelt down so she was at eye level with him. "Besides," she said with a slight smile, "I'm a bookbinder's daughter. If there's one thing I know how to do, it's research. There are books about magic, about curses, about witches. There are scholars who study these things. We'll find information, we'll find her, and we'll break this curse." For a long moment, Farid just stared at her. Then, impossibly, tears began to form in his golden eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "In 3 years, you're the first person who has seen me, really seen me, the first person who has cared." Nura reached out and gently stroked the golden fur between his ears. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. "Neither of us is alone." They sat together in the lamplight, the golden cat and the young woman, and for the first time since her father had died, Nura felt something like hope blooming in her chest. She had a purpose now. She had a quest. And perhaps, she thought, though she didn't yet dare to name the feeling, she had something else too, something that grew from understanding and companionship, and the slow recognition of a kindred soul. But that was a thought for another day. For now, there was work to do. They talked until the golden light began to fade from Farid's fur. Almost 2 hours, just as he had predicted. He told her more about his life before the curse, about the stories he used to tell, about the places he had seen. She told him about her father, about growing up in the house above the bookshop, about the loneliness that had followed Ibrahim's death. And they made plans. "The fourth trial," Farid said as his fur began to shift back to ordinary gray-brown. "We need to be ready for it. I don't know when it will come or what form it will take, but when it does, you need to trust me, even if what I do seems strange or frightening." "I trust you," Nura said simply. Farid nodded, and then his voice began to fade, becoming less distinct, less human, until the last words were more feeling than sound. "Thank you." And then he was just a cat again, sitting on the floor, looking up at her with ordinary green eyes. But Nura saw him differently now. When she looked at Zarif, at Farid, she no longer saw just a pet. She saw a young man trapped in an animal's body, brave and lonely and hopeful. She saw someone worth saving. "Come on," she said, standing. "Let's get some sleep. Tomorrow we start researching." Zarif, Farid meowed in agreement and followed her to bed. But that night, as Nura lay in the darkness with the warm weight of a cat against her feet, she found herself thinking not about curses or witches, but about the way Farid's voice had sounded when he thanked her. The way his eyes had looked at her with such gratitude and something else, something she couldn't quite name. And she realized, with a start, that she was no longer just trying to help a cursed stranger out of obligation. She was doing this because she cared about him, truly cared, in a way that went beyond friendship, beyond simple compassion. "Oh," she thought, "oh no," or perhaps, "oh yes," but she pushed the thought away, not ready to examine it yet, and let sleep take her. Outside, the crescent moon sank toward the horizon, and the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. The story was only beginning. Chapter 7. The Book That Refuses to be Read. The next morning, Nura woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. She had a goal now: break Farid's curse. And goals, she had learned from her father, were best approached systematically. First step: research. Her father's library was extensive, but it was focused mostly on literature, history, and practical manuals for bookbinding. He hadn't collected many books on magic. Ibrahim had been a practical man, skeptical of superstition. But Nura knew where to find such books. After breakfast, grilled fish for Farid, bread and dates for herself, she locked up the shop and made her way through the winding streets of Al-Bahar to the old quarter where the scholars and mystics lived. Farid trotted beside her, once again appearing to be nothing more than an ordinary cat, though Nura kept catching herself glancing down at him and thinking, "That's Farid. That's a person. A man who can't speak right now but who understands everything." It made her self-conscious in a way she hadn't been before. She found herself talking to him more as she walked, pointing out landmarks, explaining where they were going. "We're heading to see Sheikh Rashid," she said as they navigated a narrow alley. "He's a collector of unusual books, texts on alchemy, astrology, folk magic, that sort of thing. My father knew him slightly. Hopefully he'll help us." Farid meowed, and Nura chose to interpret it as agreement. Sheikh Rashid lived in a tall, narrow house that leaned slightly to one side, as if tired of standing upright. The door was painted blue, the color that protected against evil spirits, and decorated with symbols Nura didn't recognize. She knocked. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open, revealing a small, wizened man with a magnificent white beard and eyes that were startlingly youthful despite his obvious age. "Yes," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "Sheikh Rashid? My name is Nura. I'm Ibrahim the bookbinder's daughter. I was wondering if I could consult with you about—" "Ibrahim's daughter." The old man's face lit up. "I heard about his passing. A good man, your father. Come in, come in. And your cat, too. I like cats. They understand things that humans miss. If only you knew," Nura thought as she followed him inside. The interior of Sheikh Rashid's house was exactly what Nura had expected. Every surface covered with books, scrolls, strange objects, and things she couldn't identify. The smell of incense and old paper filled the air. The sheikh led her to a sitting room, or what would have been a sitting room if half of it wasn't occupied by stacks of manuscripts, and gestured for her to sit on a cushion. He settled across from her with a grunt, while Farid explored the room with apparent fascination. "Now then," the sheikh said, pouring mint tea from a pot that had been keeping warm on a small brazier. "What brings Ibrahim's daughter to my door? Looking for rare books? I have a first edition of Al-Kindi's treatise on optics, if you're interested. Your father always admired that sort of thing." "Actually," Nura said, accepting the tea, "I'm looking for information about curses. Transformation curses specifically. The kind that change people into animals." Sheikh Rashid's eyebrows rose. "Curses? That's a bit outside your father's usual interests. What's this about?" Nura hesitated. She hadn't planned what to say. How much should she reveal? But looking at the sheikh's kind, curious eyes, she found herself telling the truth, or most of it. "I have a friend," she said carefully. "Someone who has been cursed by a witch, transformed into an animal. I want to help them, but I don't know how. I need to understand how such curses work, what it takes to break them, and how to find the person who cast the curse in the first place." The sheikh was quiet for a moment, studying her. Then he glanced at Farid, who had stopped exploring and was sitting very still, watching the old man with intent eyes. "Your friend," the sheikh said slowly. "They're closer than you're letting on, aren't they?" Nura felt her cheeks warm. What do you mean?" "My dear girl, I have been studying magic for 50 years. I can see the threads of enchantment as clearly as you can see that tea in your hand. And there is a very powerful spell in this room right now." He nodded toward Farid. "A very powerful spell indeed, bound to that cat." Nura's heart skipped. "You can see it? See it, feel it, almost taste it. That's no ordinary animal. That's a transformed human, unless I'm very much mistaken. And judging by your reaction, I'm not mistaken at all." For a moment, Nura considered denying it. But what was the point? The sheikh had already figured it out. "His name is Farid," she said quietly. "He was a storyteller. A witch cursed him 3 years ago. He's been trapped as a cat ever since. Last night, he was finally able to speak to me. Just for a little while. He told me that he has to complete 4 trials before he can seek out the witch and ask to be freed. 3 trials are done. 1 remains." "Fascinating," Sheikh Rashid murmured. "A conditional curse with trial requirements. That's sophisticated magic. Old magic. The kind the ancients used before Islam came to these lands." He stood suddenly, with surprising agility for a man his age. "Wait here." He disappeared into the maze of books and objects, leaving Nura and Farid alone. "He knows," Nura whispered. Is that all right?" Farid meowed and rubbed against her leg, which she interpreted as reassurance. A few minutes later, the sheikh returned, carrying a large, leather-bound book. The leather was so dark it was almost black, and it looked ancient, The kind of ancient that made Nura's bookbinder instincts itch with concern about proper preservation. "This," Sheikh Rashid said, laying the book on a low table between them, "is something I acquired from a dealer in Damascus 20 years ago. He claimed it was a copy of a text from the library of Baghdad, from before the Mongols destroyed the city. I've never been able to verify that, but the magic described in it is certainly pre-Islamic." He opened the book carefully, and Nura leaned forward. The pages were covered in text, Arabic, but an older form of it, difficult to read. And there were illustrations, strange diagrams, symbols, drawings of creatures both mundane and fantastic. "This section," the sheikh said, turning pages until he found what he was looking for, "deals with transformation curses. Let me read." He squinted at the text, his lips moving silently. Then he began to translate aloud. "The curse of transformation is among the cruelest of enchantments, for it takes not life, but identity. The victim retains their soul, their mind, their human awareness, but loses the ability to express it, to be recognized, to be treated as what they truly are. Such curses are favored by those who wish to inflict suffering without the mercy of death. There are many types of transformation, but the most common binds the victim's return to human form to a series of conditions, trials, sacrifices, or proofs of worthiness. These conditions vary according to the caster's whim, but they always reflect the nature of the original transgression that provoked the curse. To break such a curse, 3 things are required. First, the conditions must be fulfilled completely. Second, the victim must confront the caster and demand release. Third, and most importantly, there must be a willing sacrifice. Nura's breath caught. Sacrifice? What kind of sacrifice? Sheikh Rashid continued reading. "The sacrifice is always personal, always meaningful to the one who makes it. It might be a treasured possession, a cherished dream, or even a piece of the sacrifice maker's own self. The magic requires balance. Something must be given up to restore what was taken." He looked up from the book. In other words, breaking Farid's curse won't just require completing his trials and finding the witch. Someone, probably you, will have to give up something important, something that matters to you deeply. Nura felt a chill run down her spine. Like what? That's impossible to predict. The magic will demand what it demands. But it won't be easy, I can tell you that much. He turned more pages, scanning the text. As for finding the witch, that's trickier. If she's a wanderer, she could be anywhere. But there are places where powerful magic users tend to gather. Sacred sites, places where the boundary between the mortal world and the realm of spirits is thin. Islands, mountain peaks, ancient ruins. If I were looking for a powerful witch, I would start with the places marked on this map. He turned to a page that showed a hand-drawn map, crude but detailed, showing the lands around the Mediterranean and beyond. Certain locations were marked with symbols. "These are the traditional gathering places," the sheikh explained. "The Island of Shadows off the coast of Libya, the Cave of Winds in the mountains of Persia, the ruins of Carthage, the Well of Souls in Jerusalem. If your witch has been alive for 100 years or more, she probably knows these places, and if she's seeking solitude, she might have gone to one of them." Nura studied the map, committing it to memory. "How do I get to these places?" "Very carefully," Sheikh Rashid said dryly. "These aren't tourist destinations, girl. They're dangerous, haunted, some would say. You can't just walk up to them." "But I have to try," Nura said. "I have to help him." The sheikh looked at her for a long moment, then at Farid, then back at her. A small smile played across his lips. "You care about him," he said, "more than just wanting to help a cursed stranger." You care. Nura felt her cheeks burn. He's my friend. Well, if friendship compels you to risk your life traveling to haunted islands and confronting witches, then you're a better friend than most. He closed the book. You can't take this with you. It's too valuable and too fragile. But I'll make you a copy of the relevant sections. Come back tomorrow, and I'll have it ready. Thank you, Nura said earnestly. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. You haven't completed the 4th trial, you haven't found the witch, and you haven't made the sacrifice. Thank me if you both survive all that and he's restored to human form. They left Sheikh Rashid's house with Nura's mind whirling. A sacrifice. She would have to give up something important. What did she have that was important? Her house? Her father's shop? Those were valuable, but she couldn't imagine them being the kind of meaningful sacrifice the magic would demand. What else? Her skills? Her memories? Her feelings? She glanced down at Farid padding along beside her and felt that strange tightness in her chest again. Was that what the magic would demand? That she give up whatever was growing between them? That she sacrifice her feelings to free him? It seemed cruel. But then, magic was often cruel. She pushed the thought away. They would deal with that when they came to it. First, they had to complete the 4th trial, and based on what Farid had told her, the 4th trial would involve air, wind, breath, storms. Nura looked up at the clear blue sky and wondered when the storm would come. She didn't have to wait long. Chapter 8. The Book That Refuses to Be Read and New Mysteries. That evening, Nura returned to Sheikh Rashid's house as promised. The old scholar greeted her with a thick sheaf of papers, his careful copies of the relevant sections from the ancient book. I stayed up most of the night making these, he said, handing them to her. My eyes aren't what they used to be, so forgive any errors, but the essential information is there. I can't thank you enough, Nura said. Then don't try. Just be careful, girl. Magic isn't like the stories make it seem. It's not adventures and happy endings. It's dangerous, unpredictable, and it always costs more than you think you're willing to pay. Nura nodded solemnly and tucked the papers into her bag. But as she turned to leave, the sheikh called out, "One more thing." She turned back. "There's a merchant who comes through Al-Bahar every few months, an odd fellow named Yusuf, who deals in rare books and stranger things. He was here last week, actually, and he mentioned he'd recently acquired something unusual, a book that changes depending on who reads it. He said it revealed different texts to different people, as if it was choosing what to show. I didn't believe him, but..." The sheikh shrugged. "Given what you're dealing with, it might be worth investigating. Books with their own will are rare, but they tend to be connected to powerful magic. If this book is real, it might have information about your witch. Yusuf said he was staying at the caravanserai of the Golden Dome for another few days before heading north." "I'll find him," Nura said. "Thank you." The caravanserai of the Golden Dome was the largest in Al-Bahar, a sprawling complex of rooms and stables built around a central courtyard where merchants gathered to trade and exchange news. Nura found it easily. Everyone in the city knew the Golden Dome, which actually did have a gilt dome that caught the sunset and glowed like fire. Inside the courtyard, the evening was busy with activity. Merchants displayed their wares, travelers haggled over prices, and the smell of cooking food filled the air. Nura asked around until she found someone who knew Yusuf, the book merchant. "Strange old man," a spice trader told her, always muttering to himself. "His stall is in the back corner near the stables, but I'd be careful. There's something not quite right about him." Nura thanked the trader and made her way through the crowd, Farid following close at her heels. She found Yusuf's stall exactly where the spice trader had said, a small space crammed with books, scrolls, and loose papers. Behind a table covered with volumes sat an elderly man with wild gray hair and eyes that seemed to look in slightly different directions. "Yusuf?" Nura asked. The man looked up. "Depends who's asking. If you're from the tax collector's office, then no, I'm his cousin Mustafa. If you're a customer, then yes, I'm Yusuf. What do you want?" "I heard you have an unusual book, one that changes depending on who reads it." Yusuf's mismatched eyes focused on her with sudden intensity. "Who told you about that?" "Sheikh Rashid." "Ah, the old mystic." Yes, I have such a book. Very rare, very expensive, not for casual buyers." "I'm not a casual buyer," Nura said. "I need information about magic, about curses. I'm willing to pay." Yusuf studied her for a long moment, then glanced down at Farid. His eyes widened slightly. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting. The cat has a shadow that doesn't match his body, a sign of transformation magic, if I'm not mistaken." Nora's heart skipped. This man could see magic too? "You're perceptive," she said carefully. "I deal in magical books. You develop an eye for these things." He stood and rummaged through a locked chest beneath his table, eventually pulling out a volume bound in dark leather that looked disturbingly similar to the ancient book Sheikh Rashid had shown her, but somehow different, newer, yet also older, as if it existed outside normal time. "This," Yusuf said, laying it on the table, "is the Kitab al-Asrar al-Mutahayyira, the Book of Changing Secrets. I bought it from a dealer in Cairo who claimed it came from the lost library of a sultan who practiced black magic. I don't know if that's true, but the book is definitely magical." He opened it. The pages were blank. "You see? Nothing. But watch." He turned the book toward himself and stared at the page. Slowly, text began to appear. Arabic script, flowing across the paper as if written by an invisible hand. "It shows me a recipe for ink made from crushed beetles," Yusuf said. "Useful for my trade, but hardly earth-shaking. But when my assistant looked at it, she saw a love poem, and when a soldier looked at it, he saw a tactical manual. The book reveals what each person needs to see, or what it thinks they need to see anyway." "May I try?" Nura asked, her pulse quickening. 2 silver dirhams to look at it, 10 gold dinars to buy it. Nura didn't have 10 gold dinars, not after paying for research materials and still needing money to live on. But she had 2 silver dirhams. She counted out the coins and placed them on the table. Yusuf pocketed them and turned the book toward her. "Look, but don't try to steal it. The book has protective measures." Nura leaned over the blank page. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, text began to appear. Not Arabic this time, but something older. Symbols and pictographs mixed with script she could barely read. But as she focused, the symbols began to resolve into words she could understand. "Seeker of the lost voice. You walk a path worn by many but completed by few. The curse you seek to break was forged in anger and sealed with pride. To undo it requires 3 keys. The first key, complete the trials of the 4 elements. 3 are done, 1 remains. The trial of air will come when you least expect it, in a moment of choice between self and other. The second key, find the weaver of the curse at the edge of the world, where land meets sky and the dead walk with the living. She dwells on the island of shadows, in a tower of black stone. The third key, offer a sacrifice that cannot be reclaimed. The magic will demand what it demands, and you must give it willingly, without regret. Be warned, the path ahead will test not just your courage, but your heart. Love freely given is the strongest magic. but also the most dangerous. Nura's breath caught. The book knew. It knew about Farid's curse, knew about the trials, knew about the witch, and it mentioned love. She looked down at Farid, who was standing on his hind legs, trying to see the book. Could he read it too? "What does it say?" Yusuf asked, his voice curious. "It's instructions," Nura said slowly, "about how to break a curse." "Interesting. The book usually doesn't give such direct information. You must be on an important path." He held out his hand. "If you want to keep it, it's 10 gold dinars. If not, I'll need it back." Nura's mind raced. 10 gold dinars. She didn't have that much. But this book could be invaluable if it could give her directions to the witch, information about the trials. "I don't have 10 gold dinars right now," she said, "but I could get them. I could sell some of my father's books or take commissions." "No need," a voice said behind her. Nura spun around. Standing there was a woman she had never seen before, middle-aged, dressed in the plain clothes of a merchant's wife, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "I couldn't help but overhear," the woman said. "You're trying to help someone who's been cursed. That's a noble goal. I'll pay for the book." "What?" Nura said. "No, I can't accept." "Consider it a gift," the woman said. She pulled a small purse from her belt and counted out 10 gold dinars onto Yusuf's table. "One act of kindness deserves another. And who knows? Perhaps someday you'll pass the kindness forward." Before Nura could protest further, the woman patted her shoulder, smiled, and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of the caravanserai. "Well," Yusuf said, pocketing the coins, "that was fortunate. The book is yours." Nura picked up the Book of Changing Secrets with trembling hands. She still couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "Who was that woman?" she asked. Yusuf shrugged. "I've never seen her before. But magic has a way of providing what's needed when the need is genuine. Take your book, girl, and may it serve you well." That night, back in her house above the bookshop, Nura sat at her table with the Book of Changing Secrets open in front of her. Farid sat beside her, and together they read what the book revealed. The text changed slightly each time Nura looked at it, but certain information remained constant. The island of Shadows was off the coast of Libya, several weeks' journey by sea. It was avoided by sailors, who considered it cursed. The witch's name was Zahara, the blooming one, though whether that was her birth name or a title, the book didn't say. The fourth trial would involve a choice: save oneself or save another. Only by choosing to save another would the trial be complete. And the sacrifice, the book was frustratingly vague about that. It said only that the sacrifice must come from the heart, must be freely given, and must cost the giver something irreplaceable. "I don't understand," Nura murmured. "What could I possibly have that would break your curse?" Farid meowed softly and rubbed his head against her hand. Nura stroked his fur, thinking. Then she turned to a fresh page in the book and asked aloud, "What happens if the curse isn't broken?" New text appeared. "The curse will eventually consume the transformed one entirely. As the years pass, their human mind will fade, and they will become fully animal, losing all memory of their human life. This process takes decades, but it is inevitable unless the curse is broken." Nura felt ice in her veins. "Farid, how long has it been?" 3 years, he had said. How many decades did he have? 20? 30? It seemed like a long time, but Nura knew that decades could pass quickly, and the thought of Farid slowly losing himself, forgetting he had ever been human, was unbearable. "We'll break it," she said firmly. "I don't care what it takes. We'll complete the fourth trial, we'll find this island of shadows, and will make Zahara undo what she did. The fourth trial was still coming, and according to the book, it would involve a choice between herself and another. What kind of choice? In what situation? She didn't know, but she had a feeling she would find out soon, very soon. Chapter 9. The City of Copper Domes and the First Trial. 3 days after acquiring the Book of Changing Secrets, Nura began making preparations for a journey. She had never planned anything like this before. When she'd sailed with Abdullah, he had handled all the arrangements, hiring the ship, provisioning, navigation. But this time, she was on her own. Well, not entirely on her own. She had Farid, and she had the information from the book and Sheikh Rashid's notes. But still, the prospect was daunting. She needed to reach the Island of Shadows, which was at least 2 months' journey away, first by land across the desert to the coast of Libya, then by sea to the island itself. She would need supplies, money, and a way to travel safely. The money, at least, was less of a problem than she'd feared. Word had spread about the woman with the luck cat, and business at the shop had been better than ever. People wanted books bound and copied by the woman whose cat had saved the lower quarter from flooding. Nura had been able to save almost 15 gold dinars, enough for a modest journey if she was careful. As for supplies and travel arrangements, she sought advice from the most experienced traveler she knew, Abdullah Al-Fassi, the merchant she had sailed with months ago. She found him in the market, inspecting a shipment of ceramics, and he greeted her warmly. "Nura, my favorite copyist, have you reconsidered my offer to sail with me again?" "Actually," Nura said, "I need your advice. I'm planning a journey, a long one, and I need to know the best way to reach the Libyan coast." Abdullah's bushy eyebrows rose. "Libya, that's a serious journey for a young woman alone. What's in Libya?" "Research," Nura said, which was technically true, "for a book I'm working on." Well, the safest way would be to join a caravan. There's a major trade route that goes west from here, across the desert to Tripoli. Caravans leave every few weeks, merchants, pilgrims, traders. You could hire space on one. It takes about 3 weeks to reach the coast, depending on the weather and how many stops you make. And from there to reach an island off the coast, you'd need to hire a boat. Fishermen sometimes do passenger runs between the islands and the mainland. But be careful. The waters off Libya can be treacherous. Pirates, storms, strange currents. Make sure you hire someone reputable. Nura thanked him and made mental notes of everything he'd said. Over the next week, she prepared. She sold some of her father's books, the ones she knew he'd kept only out of completeness rather than love. It hurt to let them go, but she needed the money. She packed a bag with essentials, clothes, the Book of Changing Secrets, Sheikh Rashid's notes, writing materials, a small knife, dried food. She arranged for a neighbor to watch the shop while she was gone, telling them she was traveling to visit family, and she found a caravan that was heading west in 3 days' time, a merchant caravan carrying textiles and spices to trade in Tripoli. The caravan master, a no-nonsense woman named Jamila, agreed to let Nura join for 3 gold dinars. "You'll walk most of the way," Jamila warned. "We have camels for cargo, not passengers, and you'll need your own food and water. We stop at oases along the way, but you can't rely on that. Bring enough for a month, in case we get delayed." "I understand," Nura said. "And the cat? He comes with me." Jamila shrugged. "Fine. Cats are good luck in the desert. They sense sandstorms before humans do." If only you knew, Nura thought. The caravan left Al-Bahar at dawn on a hot, clear morning. There were about 30 people in total. Merchants, their servants, a few pilgrims heading to holy sites in the west, and a group of Bedouin guides who would lead them through the desert. The first day was grueling. Nura had thought she was in reasonable shape from walking around Al-Bahar, but walking through sand under the blazing sun was entirely different. By midday, her legs ached, her throat was parched despite drinking water, and she was seriously questioning her life choices. Farid, meanwhile, rode in her bag, his head poking out, seeming perfectly content. "This was your idea," Nura muttered to him during a brief rest stop. "You could at least look sympathetic." Farid meowed, which she interpreted as, "I'm a cat, I don't have to walk." But the caravan was well organized, and the Bedouin guides knew what they were doing. They stopped during the hottest part of the day, resting in the shade of tents, and traveled in the early morning and late afternoon when the heat was more bearable. At night, the caravan would make camp and everyone would gather around fires to eat and tell stories. It was during one of these evening gatherings, 3 days into the journey, that Nura heard something interesting. One of the Bedouin guides, an old man named Khalid, was telling stories to anyone who would listen. Most were familiar tales, stories of jinn in the desert, of lost cities buried under sand, of the ancient kings who had ruled these lands before the coming of Islam. But then he told a story Nura hadn't heard before. "They say," Khalid intoned, his voice carrying in the still desert air, "that far to the west, beyond even the great city of Tripoli, there is an island that does not appear on any map, an island of shadows, where the sun never shines bright and the dead walk among the living. It is said that a powerful sorceress lives there in a tower of black stone. She has lived for 100 years or 1,000. No one knows for certain. She grants wishes, they say, but always at a terrible price. Men have gone to seek her out, hoping for power or wealth or eternal life. Few return. Those who do are changed." Nora's pulse quickened. The island of shadows. Khalid was talking about the very place she was trying to reach. "Do you know where this island is?" she asked. Khalid looked at her, his weathered face serious in the firelight. "Why would a young woman want to know about such a place? It's not somewhere anyone should go willingly." "I'm a scholar," Nura said, which was stretching the truth. "I collect stories. If this island exists, I'd like to document it." Khalid studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "It's said to lie off the coast, north of Tripoli. 3 days' sail if the winds are good. But sailors won't go near it. You'd have to find a captain either very brave or very foolish to take you there." "I'll find one," Nura said quietly. That night, lying in her small tent with Farid curled beside her, Nura stared at the canvas ceiling and thought about what lay ahead. An island that sailors avoided, a sorceress who granted wishes at terrible prices, a curse that needed breaking. And somewhere in all of that, a choice that would determine whether Farid remained trapped forever or finally regained his humanity. "We'll make it," she whispered to Farid. "We'll complete the 4th trial, find Zahara, and break your curse, I promise." Farid purred softly, and Nura let the sound lull her to sleep. But even in sleep, she dreamed of black towers and choices she couldn't yet name. The caravan traveled for 18 days across the desert. They passed through ancient ruins, the remnants of Roman cities long abandoned. They stopped at oases where palm trees grew around pools of sweet water and traders from different caravans exchanged news and goods. They weathered one sandstorm, a terrifying experience where the world disappeared in a wall of stinging, choking sand, and everyone had to huddle in their tents with cloth wrapped around their faces, waiting for it to pass. During the sandstorm, Nura noticed something. Farid became agitated before the storm hit, pacing and meowing urgently. It was Farid's warning that gave the caravan time to properly secure everything before the worst of the storm arrived. "Your cat saved us," Jamila told Nura afterward. "Without that warning, we might have lost supplies or even people." Was that part of the fourth trial? Nura wondered. But no. The book had said the trial would involve a choice between self and other. Farid's warning about the storm didn't fit that description. The real trial was still ahead. Finally, on the 19th day, the caravan crested a large dune, and there, in the distance, was a thin line of blue. "The sea," Jamila announced. "We'll reach Tripoli tomorrow." Nura felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. They had made it across the desert, but now came the hard part, finding a ship to take them to an island that no one wanted to visit. Tripoli, when they reached it the next day, was even larger than Al-Bahar, a sprawling port city with massive walls and a harbor filled with ships of every size. Nura parted ways with the caravan, thanking Jamila and paying the agreed-upon fare. Then, with Farid in her bag and her belongings slung over her shoulder, she made her way down to the docks. She spent 2 days asking every captain and sailor she met if they would take her to the Island of Shadows. The responses were uniformly negative. "That cursed place? Not for all the gold in Christendom? I've heard stories about that island. Ships that go there don't come back. Find another captain, girl. I value my life." On the third day, as Nura was sitting on a dock, feeling discouraged and wondering if she'd have to find another way, an old sailor approached her. He was a grizzled man with skin like tanned leather and eyes that had seen too much. He sat down beside her without asking permission. "You're looking for passage to the Island of Shadows," he said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Because I've been listening to you ask every captain in the harbor, and because I recognize desperation when I see it." He pulled out a pipe and began packing it with tobacco. "What's on that island that's worth risking your life?" Nura hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. "Someone I care about is cursed. The person who cast the curse lives on that island. I need to find her and convince her to lift it." The sailor lit his pipe and took a long draw. "A curse, eh? That's serious business. And you think you can just walk up to a powerful witch and ask nicely for her to undo her work?" "I have to try." The sailor studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I believe you. You've got that look, the look of someone who's going to do something stupid and dangerous no matter what anyone tells them. I respect that. My name is Tariq. I have a boat, not much to look at, but she's seaworthy. I'll take you to the island." "You will?" Nura could hardly believe it. "Why? Everyone else refused." "Because," Tariq said, 30 years ago someone helped me when I had no hope left. Saved my life, actually. I've been looking for a way to pay that debt forward ever since. Maybe this is it." He stood and gestured for Nura to follow. "Come on, we leave at dawn tomorrow. And bring your cat. I like cats." As Nura followed the old sailor through the crowded docks, Farid poking his head out of the bag to look around, she felt a surge of hope. They were going to make it. They were going to reach the Island of Shadows. And soon, very soon, Farid's curse would finally be broken. She hoped. Chapter 10. The Path Through the Sea of Demons and the Second Trial. Captain Tariq's boat was called the Wandering Star, and it was, as he had warned, not much to look at. It was a small fishing vessel, single-masted, with a hull that had been patched so many times it was hard to tell what was original wood and what was repair. The sail was faded and stained. The deck creaked ominously when you walked on it, but when Nura expressed concern, Tariq just laughed. "She may not be pretty," he said, patting the rail affectionately, "but she's sturdy. I've sailed her through worse storms than you can imagine. She'll get us where we need to go." They left Tripoli's harbor at dawn. the city's minarets and walls turning golden in the early light. Tariq handled the boat alone. He had no crew, which Nura found slightly alarming, but he assured her he'd made solo voyages many times before. "Besides," he said, "you can help. Ever sailed before?" "Once, on a merchant ship." "Good enough. You'll learn as we go." The first day at sea was peaceful. The water was calm, the wind steady, and Tariq taught Nura the basics of handling the sail and reading the weather. Farid, meanwhile, seemed perfectly content, sitting on the bow of the boat and watching the water with intense concentration. "Your cat is unusual," Tariq observed. "He watches the sea like he understands it." "He understands more than you might think," Nura said carefully. Tariq gave her a sharp look but didn't press further. That night, they anchored in a small cove along the coast. Tariq cooked a simple meal of fish and flatbread over a small brazier, and they ate while watching the stars emerge. "The Island of Shadows is about 3 days north of here," Tariq said, pointing into the darkness. "Maybe 4, depending on the wind. The waters are strange in that area. Currents that don't follow normal patterns, mists that rise without reason. Some sailors say the island itself moves, though I think that's superstition." "Have you been there before?" Nura asked. "Close, not on the island itself, but near it. Once, when I was a young man, my ship was blown off course in a storm. We ended up in those waters. We saw things." "What kind of things?" Tariq was quiet for a moment, staring into his tea. "Shapes in the water, not fish, not whales, something else. And the island, we saw it from a distance, rising out of the mist. There was a tower on it, black as night, and even from far away it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in the natural world." He shook his head. "We didn't investigate. We got out of those waters as fast as we could. My captain said we'd been lucky, that ships that went closer often disappeared. But you're taking me there anyway. Because you asked. And because I think whatever you're doing is important, even if it's also foolish." He smiled slightly. "Besides, I'm an old man. If I'm going to die, might as well be doing something interesting." Nura wasn't sure whether to be reassured or terrified by that statement. They set sail again at dawn. The second day was more challenging. The wind picked up and the sea grew choppy. Nura, who had thought her seasickness was behind her, found herself hanging over the rail more than once, wishing she was back on solid ground. Farid, infuriatingly, was completely unaffected. He prowled the small deck with perfect balance, even when the boat pitched and rolled. By evening, they had left the coast behind entirely. In every direction, there was nothing but water, endless gray-green water beneath a cloudy sky. "We're in the deep waters now," Tariq said. "The Island of Shadows is northeast of here. We should reach it by tomorrow night if the weather holds." But the weather didn't hold. That night, lying in the cramped space below deck that Tariq had cleared for her, Nura woke to the sound of thunder. She climbed up to the deck and found Tariq at the helm, his face grim as he struggled with the wheel. "Storm coming," he said tersely. "A bad one, I can feel it." Nura looked at the sky. It was completely black. No stars, no moon, just solid darkness. And in the distance she could see flashes of lightning like cracks in the sky itself. "Should we turn back?" she asked. "Too late. It's between us and the coast. We have to ride it out." The storm hit with terrifying speed. One moment the sea was merely rough. The next it was chaos. Waves as tall as houses. Wind that howled like a living thing. Rain that fell so hard it was like being beaten with small stones. The wandering star pitched and rolled sickeningly. Nura clung to the mast, soaked to the skin, terrified they were going to capsize at any moment. "Secure the sail!" Tariq shouted over the roar of the storm. "If it tears, we're done for." Nura tried to move, but the deck was slippery and the boat was moving too violently. She couldn't reach the sail lines. And then she felt it, that familiar electric sensation in the air. Magic. She looked around frantically and saw Farid, clinging to the rail near the bow, and his fur was changing. Not black this time, not red or blue. This time, his fur was shifting to a strange, luminous silver green, the color of deep ocean water lit by bioluminescent creatures, the color of storm clouds shot through with moonlight. Blue-green, Nura thought. Water and air combined. Farid yowled, that strange, almost human cry, and suddenly the storm changed. Not stopped, not calmed, but changed. The waves that had been crashing over the deck began to part, flowing around the boat instead of over it. The wind that had been tearing at the sail began to push from behind instead of from the side, driving them forward instead of threatening to capsize them. "What in the name of—" Tariq began, staring in astonishment. "Just keep steering," Nura shouted. "Keep us pointed northeast." She didn't know how she knew that was the right direction, but she did. Some instinct, some connection to Farid and his magic, told her that the storm was actually pushing them toward their destination, that this was somehow part of the plan, part of the magic. The storm raged for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. And through it all, Farid stood at the bow, glowing with that strange blue-green light, his cry rising above even the thunder. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm broke. The clouds parted, revealing a sky full of stars. The wind died to a breeze, the sea calmed, and ahead, perhaps a mile distant, rose an island. Even in the starlight, Nura could see it, a dark, forbidding landmass crowned with a tower of black stone, just as Tariq had described. Mist clung to its shores like a living thing. The island of shadows. They had made it. Nura looked at Farid. His fur was gray-brown again, and he was sitting calmly on the rail, grooming himself as if nothing unusual had happened. But Nura knew the truth. Farid had saved them. He had turned the storm from a death sentence into a conveyance. "Your cat," Tariq said slowly, "is not normal." "No," Nura agreed. "He's not. Is he connected to what you're doing here? To the curse you mentioned?" "He is the curse," Nura said quietly. "Or rather, he's the victim of it. That's why we're here, to break it." Tariq absorbed this information, then nodded slowly. "Magic, I should have guessed. Nothing else would drive someone to come to this forsaken place." He turned the wheel, pointing the boat toward the island. "Well, we've come this far. Might as well finish it." As they approached the island, Nura noticed something strange. The water around it glowed faintly, as if lit from below, and in the depths she could see shapes moving, large shapes, writhing and twisting like serpents or eels, but far too big to be any natural creature. "The demons of the sea," Tariq murmured. "The old stories spoke of them. Guardians of the island, some said, or prisoners trapped in the waters around it." The wandering star glided past them without incident. The creatures seemed to watch but didn't approach. Protected by Farid's magic, Nura thought. The storm brought us here, and his power keeps the guardians at bay. They reached a small beach on the island's north shore, just as dawn was breaking. Tariq anchored the boat in the shallows, and Nura waded through the water to the shore carrying Farid and her bag. The sand was black, not gray but truly black, as if burned. The trees that grew beyond the beach were strange, tall palms with dark trunks and leaves that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "I'll wait here," Tariq said, standing on the beach beside his boat. "But not for long. If you're not back in 2 days, I'll have to leave. I can't risk staying near this place longer than that." 2 days, Nura agreed. That should be enough. It would have to be enough. She turned to face the dark forest and the tower that rose beyond it, took a deep breath and stepped forward. The final trial awaited, and beyond that, the witch. Chapter 11. The Island of Shadows and the Third Choice. The forest was silent, not the peaceful silence of a sleeping woodland, but an oppressive, unnatural silence, the kind that made you want to whisper, or better yet, not speak at all. Nura walked through it with Farid at her heels, her footsteps muffled by the black sand that covered the ground. The strange, dark palms rose around them like sentinels, their fronds barely moving even when a breeze passed through. There was a path, barely visible, overgrown with dark moss, but definitely a path. It led inland, toward the center of the island where the tower stood. As they walked, Nura began to see things at the edges of her vision, flickers of movement, shapes that disappeared when she turned to look directly at them. Ghosts, she thought, or spirits. The dead walk among the living here, the legends said. "Do you see them?" she whispered to Farid. The cat's ears were flat against his head, and his tail was low. He saw them. They walked for perhaps an hour, though it was hard to judge time in this place where the light seemed constant, a gray twilight illumination that never brightened or dimmed. And then the forest ended, and they stood before the tower. It was massive, far larger than it had looked from the sea. Built of black stone that seemed to swallow light, it rose perhaps 10 stories high, with no windows except for a single opening at the very top. A narrow door stood at its base, made of wood so dark it was almost indistinguishable from the stone. And standing in front of the door was a figure. At first, Nura thought it was a statue, a carved guardian of some kind. But then it moved, and she realized it was a person, or had been a person once. It was a man, or the ghost of a man, dressed in the clothing of an ancient time, robes that might have been white once but were now gray and tattered. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and he looked at Nura with an expression of infinite sadness. "Turn back," he said, his voice like wind through empty rooms. "There is nothing here but sorrow." "I can't turn back," Nura said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "I need to speak with Zahara, the witch who lives in this tower." "Many have come seeking her," the ghost said. "Few leave unchanged, and some do not leave at all." He gestured to himself. "I am one who did not leave. I came seeking power, and I found only imprisonment. Now I am bound to this place, unable to move on, unable to find peace." "I'm sorry," Nura said sincerely, "but I have to try. Someone I care about is cursed. Only Zahara can lift it." The ghost studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. "Enter then. But know this. The tower shows you what you most desire and what you most fear. It will test you in ways you cannot anticipate. Be strong, child. Be true to yourself. That is the only way through." "Thank you," Nura said. She approached the door. It had no handle, no lock that she could see, but when she pushed, it swung open silently. Inside was darkness. Nura lit the small oil lamp she had brought and stepped across the threshold. Farid pressed close against her legs, his warmth reassuring. The door closed behind them with a soft click. The interior of the tower was not what Nura had expected. Instead of a single large space, she found herself in a corridor, narrow, made of the same black stone, lit by torches that burned with an eerie blue flame. The corridor stretched ahead, with doors on either side. "Which way?" Nura whispered. Farid moved forward confidently, as if he knew exactly where to go. Nura followed. They passed several doors. Through one, Nura heard what sounded like crying. Through another, laughter, but the wrong kind of laughter, manic and desperate. Then Farid stopped in front of a particular door. He looked up at Nura and meowed. This one? Another meow. Nura pushed the door open. Inside was a room that made her heart stop. It was her father's shop, perfect in every detail. The work table where Ibrahim had worked, the shelves of books, the tools hanging on the wall, the smell of leather and ink and old paper. And sitting at the work table, alive and healthy, was her father. Nura, Ibrahim looked up with a smile. There you are. I've been waiting for you. Come, sit with me. I want to show you something I'm working on. Nora's breath caught. It was impossible. Her father was dead. She had watched him buried, but he looked so real, so alive. She took a step forward, tears blurring her vision. Papa? Come closer, Ibrahim said, still smiling. We have so much time to make up. You've been away so long, but you're home now. You can stay. We can be together again. Nura wanted to. Oh, how she wanted to sit with her father again, to hear his voice, to feel safe and loved and not alone. She took another step, and then she felt a paw tap her leg. She looked down. Farid was sitting there, looking up at her with those green eyes, and in them she saw concern, warning. And she remembered what the ghost had said. The tower shows you what you most desire and what you most fear. This wasn't her father. It was an illusion, a test. Nura closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, she forced herself to look past the surface of what she was seeing. No, she said quietly, you're not real. My father is dead, and as much as I miss him, I can't stay here. I have something more important to do. The image of Ibrahim flickered. More important than me? More important than being with your family? Yes, Nura said, and saying it hurt like a knife to the heart. Because someone is depending on me. Someone who is alive and who needs my help. I'm sorry, Papa. I love you. I'll always love you. But I have to go. She turned away from the illusion and stepped back into the corridor, pulling the door closed behind her. When she looked back, the room was empty. Just a bare stone chamber with no furniture, no books, nothing. The first test passed. They continued down the corridor. More doors, more tests. In one room, Nura saw herself, wealthy, dressed in fine silks, living in a beautiful house. The vision showed her a life of comfort and ease, where she never had to worry about money or work again. All she had to do was abandon Farid, forget about the curse, and accept the gift the tower was offering. She closed that door too. In another room she saw Farid, but as a human, young and handsome, smiling at her. But when she looked into his eyes, they were empty. No recognition, no memory of who he had been or who she was. You can have me as a man, the vision said, but I won't remember you. I won't remember anything. Is that what you want? No, Nura said, her voice shaking. That's not what I want. I want you to be free and to be yourself, with all your memories and all your choices intact. Anything else is just another kind of curse. That door closed too. There were more tests, some subtle, some obvious, each one offering Nura something she wanted in exchange for giving up her quest. And each time she refused. Finally, they reached the end of the corridor. There was a spiral staircase leading up. Nura climbed it, Farid following, until they emerged into a circular chamber at the top of the tower. And there, standing by the single window, looking out at the gray sea, was a woman. She was not what Nura had expected. Zahara was beautiful, not with the beauty of youth, but with the ageless beauty of someone who had lived for centuries and carried that weight with grace. Her hair was long and dark, shot through with silver. Her face was unlined, but her eyes were old, ancient, really, full of knowledge and sadness and weariness. She wore simple robes, and when she turned to look at Nura, her expression was not cruel or angry. It was tired. "So," Zahara said, her voice soft and melodious, "you made it through the tower. Few do. Most get lost in their own desires and wander the corridors forever." "Are you Zahara?" Nura asked. "I am. And you are Nura, who travels with a cursed storyteller bound in the form of a cat." She glanced at Farid. "Hello, Farid. It has been some time." Farid hissed, the first sign of anger Nura had ever seen from him. Zahara smiled sadly. "Still angry with me? I don't blame you. What I did was unkind. No, more than unkind. It was cruel. The cruelty of someone who had been alone too long and forgot how to let things go." She moved away from the window and sat in a chair, the only furniture in the room besides a small table. "You've come to ask me to lift the curse," Zahara said, "but you know there's a price. The magic demands balance. Something must be sacrificed." "I'll pay it," Nura said immediately. "Whatever the price is, I'll pay it." "Will you?" Zahara studied her. "You don't even know what I'll ask for." "It doesn't matter. Farid doesn't deserve what you did to him. He deserves to be free." "And what does he deserve from you?" Zahara asked, her tone curious rather than cruel. "Why are you doing this? Guilt? Pity? Or something else?" Nura opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. Why was she doing this? It had started as simple compassion, helping a lonely cat. Then it had become about solving a puzzle, breaking a curse. But now it was something more. "Because I care about him," Nura said finally. "Because in the time we've traveled together, he's become important to me. More than important. She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "You love him," Zahara finished gently. "Even though you've barely heard his voice, even though you've known him mostly as an animal, you love who he is inside, the person trapped behind fur and silence." "Yes," Nura whispered. "I think I do." Zahara nodded slowly. "That makes the sacrifice easier then, or harder. I'm not sure which." She stood and walked to the center of the room, where she drew a circle on the floor with her finger, a circle that glowed with soft golden light. To break the curse, someone must give up something precious. The magic doesn't care about gold or jewels. Those are easily replaced. It cares about things that matter to the heart. Dreams, memories, feelings. She looked at Nura directly. "You must choose, Nura. I can break the curse and restore Farid to his human form. But if I do, you will forget him. Not completely. You'll remember the cat you traveled with, remember the journey. But you won't remember that he was human. You won't remember what you felt for him. It will be as if this love never existed. He will be free, but he will be a stranger to you." Nura felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. That's the sacrifice? My feelings for him? Yes, it's the only sacrifice the magic will accept. Love freely given is the strongest magic, but it's also the most expensive to undo. To free him, you must give up what you feel for him. Nura looked at Farid. The cat, the man, was sitting very still, staring at her with those green eyes that suddenly seemed infinitely deep, infinitely aware. He understood what Zahara was offering, and he understood what it would cost. "There has to be another way," Nura said desperately. "There isn't," Zahara said, not unkindly. "I don't make the rules of magic. I just know them. This is the price. You can pay it and he goes free, or you refuse and he remains cursed. But if I forget, if I don't feel anything for him anymore, what happens to him? He'll be free, but he'll be alone again. He'll have no one. He'll have himself, Zahara said. His voice, his stories, his life. That's what you'd be giving him. The choice of what to do with his freedom. Nura's eyes filled with tears. This was impossible. She couldn't make this choice. But she had to. She thought about Farid, about the young man who loved stories, who had been trapped in silence for 3 years, who had used his curse's magic to protect her again and again, even though he couldn't speak, couldn't explain. She thought about the golden cat who had talked to her in the lamplight, his voice full of hope and sadness and gratitude. She thought about the promise she had made. We'll break this curse. I don't care what it takes. She had meant it then. She meant it now. All right, Nura said, her voice breaking. I'll do it. I'll give up. I'll give up what I feel for him. Break the curse. Free him. Zahara looked at her for a long moment, and something like respect flickered across her face. You're sure? I'm sure. Very well. Zahara reached out and touched Nura's forehead with one finger. Then she touched Farid with another finger. And everything went white. Chapter 12. The Deal with the Witch and the Price of Freedom. When Nura's vision cleared, she was still standing in the circular chamber at the top of the tower, but something had changed. The golden circle on the floor was glowing more brightly now, pulsing with a rhythm like a heartbeat. And standing in front of her, no longer a cat but a young man, was Farid. He was exactly as she had imagined him from his voice, perhaps 23 or 24 years old, with dark hair that fell to his shoulders, intelligent eyes the color of warm honey, and a face that was handsome in an unconventional way, all angles and intensity. He wore simple clothes, the kind a traveler might wear, and he stood unsteadily, as if his legs didn't quite remember how to hold a human body upright after 3 years as a cat. Farid, Nura breathed. He looked at her, and his eyes were full of wonder and something else, something that looked like heartbreak. Nura, he said, and his voice was the same voice she had heard that golden night, rich and warm and achingly human. You did it. You actually did it. But even as he spoke, Nura felt something strange happening inside her. It was like watching color drain from a painting, or feeling warmth slowly leaking away from a room. The feelings she had for Farid, the love, the connection, the sense of knowing him deeply, were beginning to fade, not gone yet, but fading. She could feel the magic working, taking what it had been promised. Wait, Farid said, stepping forward, his movement still awkward. Zahara, wait, I need to say something before she forgets. Speak quickly, Zahara said. She was standing by the window again, her expression unreadable. The magic has begun. It won't wait. Farid turned to Nura, and he took her hands in his. His hands were warm, solid, real, so different from paws, from fur. Nura, he said urgently, I need you to know. I need you to understand before you forget. These past months with you they've been the only good thing about this curse. You saw me when no one else did. You treated me like a person even when I couldn't speak. You risked everything to help me. Not because you had to, but because you chose to. Because of who you are. Tears were streaming down his face now. I love you, he said. I know it's strange. We've barely spoken, and most of the time I've been a cat. But I love who you are. Your kindness, your courage, your stubborn determination. The way you talk to books like they're old friends. The way you took in a lonely cat because you recognized another lonely soul. I love you, and I want you to know that, even if you won't remember it, even if you can't feel it anymore." Nura's own tears were falling now. She could feel the magic pulling at her heart, taking the love away piece by piece, but it wasn't gone yet. Not quite yet. "I love you too," she whispered, "and I'm glad I did this. I'm glad I helped you. You deserve to be free, Farid. You deserve to live and tell stories and be who you really are, even if I won't remember why it mattered so much." They stood there, holding hands, looking at each other, while the magic slowly erased what had grown between them. And then Zahara spoke. "Stop." The golden circle's pulsing froze. The feeling of things draining away paused. Nura and Farid both turned to look at the witch. Zahara was standing very still, her ancient eyes fixed on them, and her expression had changed. The weariness was still there, but now there was something else, a kind of pain, a recognition. "I've made mistakes," Zahara said quietly. "So many mistakes over the centuries. I've lived too long, seen too much, and forgotten what it means to connect with another person. That's why I cursed you, Farid. Not because you refused me, but because I couldn't bear to let go of something, someone who reminded me of what I'd lost." She moved closer to the circle, her movements slow, almost reluctant. "And now I'm doing it again. I'm taking love away because the magic demands it. But magic isn't a god. It doesn't truly demand anything. It's a tool. And the one who wields the tool makes the choices." She raised her hand, and the golden circle flared. "I'm going to offer you a different choice," Zahara said. "A choice that breaks my own rules, but maybe that's what I need to do." She looked at Nura directly. "I can complete the curse breaking as agreed. Farid goes free. You forget what you feel for him. You both live separate lives. That's one option." Then she looked at Farid. "Or I can break the curse a different way. Farid goes free, and you remember everything. You keep your feelings. You keep your connection. But there's a price, a different price." "What price?" Nura asked, her voice barely audible. Zahara smiled sadly. "Farid's gift, his storyteller's magic, the ability to enchant people with his words, to make them see what he describes, to weave tales that feel more real than reality. That spark of magic that attracted me in the first place. If I break the curse this way, he'll be free and human, but he'll lose that gift. He'll be able to speak, to tell stories, but they'll be ordinary stories. No magic, no enchantment." She spread her hands. "So choose, both of you. Farid's freedom with Nura's love lost, or Farid's freedom with his gift lost. Either way, something precious is sacrificed. That much, at least, the magic does demand." Nura and Farid looked at each other. "Your gift," Nura said immediately. "That's what you are, Farid. That's your whole life. You can't give that up." "But you," Farid countered, "what we feel, what we could have together, that's worth more than any gift. I'd rather be ordinary and have you than magical and alone." "No," Nura said firmly. "You told me once that you were Farid the storyteller, the one with the golden tongue. That's who you are. I won't let you give that up for me. And I won't let you sacrifice your feelings," Farid said, equally firm. "Do you know what it was like, being trapped as a cat, watching you care for me, knowing I could never tell you what it meant? Now that I can speak, now that I can tell you I love you, I won't give that up. I won't let the magic take it away." They had reached an impasse. Zahara watched them argue with an expression that might have been amusement or might have been sadness. It was hard to tell. "You're both idiots," she said finally. "Noble idiots, but idiots nonetheless." She raised both hands, and the golden circle blazed so brightly that Nura had to close her eyes. When she opened them again, the light had faded to a gentle glow. "I'm going to do something I haven't done in 100 years," Zahara said. "I'm going to bend the rules, not break them. Even I can't do that, but bend them." She touched Farid's forehead, then Nura's. "The curse is broken. Farid is free. And Nura, you will keep your memories, keep your feelings. But Farid, you will lose your storyteller's magic. That part of the bargain stands. The magic demands sacrifice, and that will be yours." "Wait," Farid began. "However," Zahara continued, speaking over him, "magic is not the only kind of power. You had a gift before the magic touched it, Farid. The gift of understanding people, of seeing the truth in their hearts, of finding the words that matter. That gift remains. The magic is gone, but the talent, the human talent, is still yours. You'll have to work harder. Your stories won't enchant people automatically. But if you truly love storytelling, if you truly understand the craft, you can still be great at it. Just human great, rather than magical great." She lowered her hands. "It's not perfect, but it's the best I can offer. The curse is broken. You're both free, and you get to choose what you do with that freedom." For a moment no one spoke. Then Farid laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy, and pulled Nura into an embrace. "Thank you," he said to Zahara, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Zahara shrugged, but there was something softer in her expression now. "Don't thank me. I'm the one who cursed you in the first place. This is just correction. Atonement, perhaps." She moved toward the window and looked out at the gray sea. "Now go, leave this island. Go back to the world and live your lives. And Farid, tell good stories, not magical ones, but true ones. That's more important anyway." Nura and Farid didn't need to be told twice. They made their way down the spiral staircase, through the corridor, which was now empty, the doors all gone, and out into the strange forest. As they walked back toward the beach, Nura realized something. "Farid," she said, "you can walk. You're not stumbling anymore." He looked down at his legs in surprise. "You're right. I guess my body remembered faster than I thought." "Or maybe," Nura said, glancing back at the black tower. Zahara helped with that too. They reached the beach to find Captain Tariq standing by his boat, looking anxious. "You're alive!" he exclaimed. "And you?" He stared at Farid. "You were a cat this morning." "Long story," Farid said, grinning. "I'll tell you on the way back. I'm good at telling stories." "Not as good as you used to be," Nura teased gently. "Maybe not magically good," Farid agreed, "but I'll practice." They climbed into the Wandering Star, and as Captain Tariq raised the sail and pointed the boat back toward the mainland, Nura sat beside Farid on the deck and took his hand. The sun was rising, a real sunrise, golden and warm, not the gray twilight of the island of shadows. They were free, both of them, and whatever came next, they would face it together. Chapter 13. Dawn over the sea and a new name. The journey back to Tripoli took 4 days, longer than the journey out, because the winds were contrary and Captain Tariq had to tack constantly to make progress. But Nura didn't mind. Those 4 days were precious. They were the first time she and Farid could truly talk as equals, as two humans getting to know each other without the barrier of curse or magic. They talked about everything. Farid told her stories from his life before the curse, his childhood with his sailor father, the places he'd traveled, the tales he'd collected. Without his magical gift, his stories were different, less immediately captivating perhaps, but more intimate, more personal. Nura found she preferred them this way. They felt real. Nura told him about her life too, about growing up in the house above the bookshop, learning her father's trade, the loneliness after Ibrahim's death, about the moment on the cemetery when she'd seen a lonely cat and recognized a kindred spirit. "I'm glad you did," Farid said softly. "If you hadn't taken me in, I don't know what would have happened. I might have wandered until the curse consumed me entirely." "But it didn't," Nura said. "You're here. You're free. That's what matters." They also talked about practical things. "What will you do now?" Nura asked on the third day as they sat on the deck watching the sunset. "Will you go back to being a traveling storyteller?" Farid was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. That life was lonely, always moving, never staying anywhere long enough to truly know anyone. I thought I loved it, but now I wonder if I was just running from something." "From what?" "From the possibility of staying, of connecting, of letting people matter." He looked at her. "You taught me something, Nura. You showed me that connections, real connections, the kind that take time to build, are worth more than 100 cities, 1,000 audiences. So what does that mean?" "It means," he took a breath, "it means I'd like to stay in Al-Bahar, if you'll have me. Not as your cat," he smiled slightly, "but as, well, as whatever you'd like me to be. A friend, a partner, someone who helps in your shop and tells stories in the evening and is just present." Nura felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I'd like that. I'd like that very much. And maybe," Farid continued, his voice becoming more animated, "we could do something with stories and books together. You know how to preserve them, copy them, bind them. I know how to tell them, collect them. We could create something, a library, maybe, or a school, a place where people come to share stories and learn about the world beyond their own experience." "A school for storytellers," Nura said, the idea taking shape in her mind. "And scribes, and anyone who loves learning." "Exactly." They smiled at each other, and in that moment, Nura felt something she hadn't felt since before her father died. Hope for the future. Not just surviving, but truly living, building something, with someone. That night, as they lay on the deck under the stars, Tariq had given Nura his cabin, and Farid slept on deck, claiming he'd spent 3 years sleeping anywhere and everywhere as a cat, so he wasn't picky. Farid asked quietly, "Nura, do you ever regret it, giving up the chance to forget? Zahara said you'd suffer less if you didn't remember the feelings." "No," Nura said without hesitation. "I don't regret it. Even if things don't work out between us, even if we decide we're better as friends than anything else, I'd rather remember. I'd rather feel. Forgetting might hurt less, but it also means less joy, less connection, less life." "I feel the same way about losing my gift," Farid said. "It was part of me for so long. But you know what? These past few days, telling stories without the magic, I've actually enjoyed it more. Because people listen because they want to, not because they're enchanted. Their appreciation is real. That matters more than I realized." "We're both learning," Nura said softly. "Yeah, we are." They reached Tripoli on the evening of the 4th day. Captain Tariq refused payment for the return journey. "You brought magic into my boat," he said, shaking his head in wonderment. "I saw things on this voyage I'll never forget. That's payment enough." "Besides," he added, looking at Farid, "something tells me you two are going to do interesting things. I like knowing I helped with that." They thanked him profusely and said their farewells. Then came the long journey back across the desert to Al-Bahar. They joined another caravan, this one headed by a cheerful merchant who was delighted to have travelers willing to share stories around the evening fires. Farid told tales every night, and while they weren't magically enchanting, they were good, engaging, emotional, memorable. The other travelers loved them. "You have a gift," the merchant told Farid one evening. "You should consider performing professionally." "I used to," Farid said, glancing at Nura with a smile. "But I think I'm going to try something different now." The desert crossing took 3 weeks this time. They got delayed by sandstorms twice. But finally, they saw the white walls of Al-Bahar rising from the coast. Home. Nura felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed it. They entered the city at sunset, and Nura led Farid through the familiar streets to the house above the bookshop. The neighbor who had been watching the shop, a kind elderly woman named Fatima, greeted them with surprise and relief. "You're back. Thank goodness. I was starting to worry. And who is this?" "This is Farid," Nura said. "He's a friend. He'll be staying with me for a while." Fatima's eyebrows rose knowingly, but she just smiled. "Well, good. You shouldn't be alone in that big house. And the shop has been doing well. I've been taking commissions like you taught me. There's quite a backlog of work waiting for you." After Fatima left, Nura and Farid climbed the stairs to the apartment above the shop. Nura opened the door and stepped inside, and the familiar smell of old books and leather and home washed over her. "It's not much," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "Just 3 rooms and—" "It's perfect," Farid interrupted. He walked to the window and looked out at the street below, at the city spreading out toward the sea. "It's absolutely perfect." That night, they ate a simple dinner of bread and dates and cheese, and Nura showed Farid her father's books, and they talked about ideas for their school, and everything felt right, natural, like this was how things were always meant to be. "I have a question," Farid said as they were preparing for bed. Nura had given him her father's old room, which she'd finally been able to enter without crying. "What should I call myself now? I mean, I was Farid the storyteller before, but that doesn't quite fit anymore. I'm not really a storyteller by trade. I'm—" "What? A retired storyteller? An ex-magical cat?" Nura laughed. "How about just Farid? No title, no label, just yourself." "Farid of Al-Bahar," he said, testing the words. "Farid who lives above a bookshop and teaches children to tell stories. Farid who used to be a cat. That last part might raise some questions." "True. Okay, we'll leave that part out." He grinned at her from the doorway. "Thank you, Nura, for everything, for seeing me, for saving me, for giving me a home. Thank you for being worth saving," Nura said softly. That night, lying in her own bed for the first time in months, Nura thought about everything that had happened. A lonely night in a cemetery, a cat who changed colors, pirates and meteors and floods, a golden voice in the darkness, a journey across desert and sea, a witch who learned to let go, and now a new beginning. She fell asleep smiling. Chapter 14. Love in the City of Sands and the Last Story. 3 months passed. Nura and Farid fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. During the day, they worked together in the shop. Nura handled the bookbinding and repair work, while Farid took charge of organizing the books and helping customers. He had a knack for recommending the right book to the right person, as if he could read what they needed before they knew it themselves. "It's not magic," he explained when Nura commented on it. "It's just paying attention, watching what interests them, listening to how they talk. Stories taught me to understand people." In the evenings, they would close the shop and go upstairs, where they would eat dinner and talk and plan. The the school was taking shape. They had decided to call it the House of Tales, a place where people could learn to read and write, where stories from different cultures would be collected and preserved, where children and adults alike could come to learn the art of storytelling. Not magical storytelling, Farid said, just human storytelling, the kind that connects people, that passes down wisdom, that helps us understand each other. They started small. Farid began offering free storytelling sessions in the courtyard outside the shop on Friday afternoons. At first, only a few children came, but word spread, and soon there were dozens of listeners, children and adults both, sitting cross-legged on the stones, captivated by the tales Farid wove. Nura began teaching a few interested students how to read and write, using her father's books as teaching materials. It wasn't grand, it wasn't magical, but it was real, and it was growing. And through it all, Nura and Farid grew closer. It happened gradually, the transformation from friends to something more. A hand held while walking through the market, a smile across the shop when a customer said something amusing, conversations that stretched late into the night, sitting at the table with cooling tea, talking about dreams and fears and silly things and important things. One evening, about 4 months after they'd returned to Al-Bahar, they were sitting on the roof of the building, a flat space where Nura's father used to dry herbs, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. "Do you ever miss it?" Nura asked quietly. "The magic, the way your stories used to enchant people?" Farid was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but less than I thought I would. The magic it was like a crutch in a way. It made things easier, but it also made them less meaningful. Now when someone enjoys one of my stories, I know it's because the story was actually good, not because they were enchanted into enjoying it. That feels more honest." He turned to look at her. "Besides, I found something better than magic." "What's that?" "This." He gestured around them, at the city, the shop below, the life they were building. A place to belong, work that matters, and... He reached over and took her hand. "You." Nura's heart skipped. They had been dancing around this moment for weeks, both of them aware of what was growing between them, but neither quite ready to name it. Until now. "Farid," she said softly. I love you," he said. "I told you that on the island, when you were about to forget. But I want to tell you again now, when you can remember it. When it counts. I love you, Nura. Not because you saved me, though you did. Not out of gratitude, though I'm grateful, but because of who you are. Because you're kind and stubborn and brilliant and brave. Because you talk to books and take in lonely cats and see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. Because when I'm with you, I feel like I'm home." Nura felt tears welling up, happy tears this time. "I love you too," she said. "I think I started loving you when you were still a cat, which is ridiculous and impossible, but it's true. And now that I know you as a person, now that I've seen your courage and your kindness and the way you light up when you tell stories, I love you even more." Farid smiled, that bright, transformative smile that made his whole face change. "So," he said, "what do we do about that?" "I don't know," Nura admitted. "I've never done this before." "Neither have I. Not really. I mean, there were people before, but nothing that felt like this." They sat in silence for a moment, still holding hands, both of them slightly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd just admitted. Then Nura laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief. "We'll figure it out," she said. "We figured out how to break a curse and cross a desert and face a witch. I think we can figure out how to be together. Agreed, Farid said. He leaned toward her, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't want to. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, sweet, the kiss of two people who had traveled a long, strange road to reach this moment and wanted to savor it. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had set completely, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "Should we tell people?" Nura asked. "About us?" "Eventually. But maybe let's just enjoy it ourselves for a while first. No announcements, no fuss. Just us." "I like that," Nura said. They sat on the roof until late into the night, talking and laughing and occasionally kissing, and Nura thought that this ordinary, non-magical, wonderfully human moment was worth more than all the enchantments in the world. 6 months later, on a warm spring evening, Nura and Farid hosted the opening of the House of Tales. It wasn't a grand affair. They didn't have the money for that. But the courtyard outside the shop was decorated with lanterns and carpets, and there was tea and sweet cakes. And most importantly, there were people, dozens of them, neighbors and customers and students and friends, all gathered to celebrate. Sheikh Rashid came, bringing a gift of rare books for their collection. Abdullah the merchant came, bringing 2 of his children who wanted to learn storytelling. Captain Tariq came, having sailed back to Al-Bahar specifically for the occasion. Even old Hassan from the cemetery came, smiling his gap-toothed smile and saying he'd heard good things about the woman and the cat who used to be a man. Farid told stories that night, old tales and new ones, some funny, some sad, all of them engaging. The audience laughed and gasped and occasionally wiped away tears, and Nura watched him with pride and love, marveling at how far they'd both come from that night in the cemetery when she'd met a lonely cat sitting on a grave. At the end of the evening, when the last guests had left and they were cleaning up the courtyard together, Farid pulled Nura aside. "I wrote something," he said. "A story. Our story, actually. Would you like to hear it?" "Of course." They sat on the steps of the shop and Farid began. Once, in a city of sand and sea, there lived a young woman who had lost everything but her father's books and her own kind heart, and she met a cat, just a cat, or so it seemed, who had lost everything but his secret soul and his hope for freedom. And neither of them knew it yet, but they were about to save each other. The cat was not a cat, you see. He was a young man who had been cursed by a witch who didn't know how to let go of what she loved. The curse turned him into an animal, and the only way to break it was to pass through 4 great trials and make a sacrifice that would cost more than gold. The young woman took in the cat because she was lonely, and he was lonely, and loneliness recognizes itself across any distance, any difference. And together they had adventures. They fought pirates in the mist and survived stars falling from the sky. They saved a drowning city and crossed an endless desert. They spoke to each other in the language of kindness and companionship that needs no words. And when the time came to break the curse, the young woman was willing to give up everything, even her own heart, to set the cat who was a man free. But the witch, who had lived 100 years and made 100 mistakes, decided to make one good choice at last. She offered a different sacrifice, and the curse was broken not with heartbreak, but with hope. The young man lost his magical gift, but he kept his voice and his stories. The young woman lost nothing at all, though she had been willing to lose everything. And together they returned to the city of sands, where they built a house of tales and taught others to find their voices and love their stories. And they loved each other, not with magic, which can be taken away, but with the sturdy, reliable, infinitely precious love of two people who choose each other every single day. And they lived, not happily ever after because life is not so simple, but they lived fully, richly, together, surrounded by books and stories and the laughter of students and the warmth of home. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun turned the sky to gold, the young man would remember what it was like to be a cat, to sit on a windowsill, to feel the sun warming his fur, to watch the woman he loved working on her books. And he would smile, because even though that time had been hard, it had also been precious. It had been the path that led him here. And the young woman would see him smile and ask what he was thinking, and he would say, "Nothing important, just that I'm glad I met you. I'm glad you saw me when I was invisible. I'm glad we found each other." And she would smile too and take his hand, and they would sit together in the golden light, two souls who had been lost and now were found, who had been alone and now were home. And that, my friends, is the end of the tale of the girl and the golden cat. Farid finished speaking and looked at Nura, who had tears streaming down her face. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "but you got the ending wrong." "What do you mean?" "It's not the end. We're still writing it. Every day we're adding new pages." Farid smiled and pulled her close. "You're right. It's not the end at all. It's just the beginning." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. The city slept. The sea whispered against the shore. And in the house above the bookshop, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had traveled through magic and danger and mystery to reach this simple, perfect moment, held each other and dreamed of all the stories yet to be told. Epilogue. Years later. The old woman sat in her chair by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky gold. She was not as old as some, but the years had touched her gently, silver in her dark hair, lines around her eyes from a lifetime of smiling. Around her, the house of tales hummed with quiet activity. Students in the library below, copying manuscripts, children in the courtyard, practicing storytelling, the smell of ink and paper and tea. Her husband came up the stairs, moving a bit slower than he used to, but still with that characteristic grace. "They're asking for another story," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "The evening group. I told them the one about the merchant and the djinn, but they want more." "You're spoiling them," she said fondly. "Tell them to go home. It's late." "In a minute." He took her hand. "I was thinking about the story. Our story. Do you ever regret it? The journey? The sacrifices?" She looked at him, this man she had loved for 30 years, whose face she knew better than her own, who had given up magic to be with her, who had chosen her every day since. "Never," she said. "Not for a single moment." "Good," he said, "because I don't either." They sat together as the golden light faded to purple, to blue, to the deep velvet of night. And somewhere in the house below, a young student was copying a story. The story of a woman and a cat who changed colors, who saved each other, who loved each other across impossible distances. The student didn't know that the old couple upstairs were the people in the story, but that was all right. The story lived on as all good stories do, passed from heart to heart, from generation to generation. And that was its own kind of magic, the very best kind.